Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil YouTube video. Today, we've got a big product comparison, and I'm very excited because I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Behind the scenes, making the BuildASoil products, we've investigated many of the popular soils out there over the years. However, on Patreon, we had a number of people mention, could we do something like this, like we did when we did the video for the Colorado Worm Company castings? If you haven't seen that, check it out. It was a really eye-opening experiment for us to actually send all those worm castings that we bought on Amazon off to the lab. And a lot of my hypothesis came true based on what we know about the worm casting industry. Now, potting soil is a totally different animal. I don't really know what to expect, but I expect wildly different results. And not only that, we're going to use this episode to go over ingredients in every single bag, ingredients on the website versus the bag, formulations. Some of these are such big companies, they have different formulations registered all over the country. So we're gonna explain that. And I think it's so important. Before I get into all the brands, I'll walk through. And what I'm gonna do right now in the beginning of this video, we'll be making a couple of videos and merging them together into one big episode. But today, my main goal is to take samples. So I've got some shears, I'm gonna open each bag. I've got sample bags, I've got a Sharpie, I'm going to label each sample. I've got my Logan Labs submission worksheet, just so I can discuss it and mention this is where we're sending it, this is how we're gonna get the results. And I'm gonna try and remember that not everyone follows BuildASoil, and so I'm gonna try and keep it fundamental as far as what type of soil test are we gonna get? How does this all work? I've got just a basic plate so I can show you what it looks like, but I'm gonna hold this off for the second part when we have the results, because at that point I'd like to show you the texture of the soil so you can kind of get a visual on it. And then we're gonna discuss all the ingredients, because one of the big things about BuildASoil, this is a new bag, by the way. It's not even being used yet, so I just used it to test. We're very particular about ingredients and the results and how that all pairs together. And there's a lot of reasons why we don't use traditional approved for organic ingredients. One example off the top, for instance, most of these products, we're gonna get to ingredients, if they're labeled organic, like this one, raised bed mix, stuff that's available at Home Depot, even other big companies, they're gonna use dehydrated poultry waste or chicken manure or feather meal, things from that industry as a waste stream. And many of my customers are kind of alarmed to find that while they may be buying or raising their own chickens and having their own eggs, or buying what they think are really well-treated organic eggs for themselves, they're kind of assuming when they go buy potting soil, if it's organic, those are from, well-fed, organically raised chickens, that because it's an organic soil, if there's chicken manure in it, probably free range, all those things, right? Man, just eggs is a whole nother video, but they're not. So any of the chicken manure in these products, none of it's organic. They were GMO corn-fed, and there's no concern about that, because chicken manure, even if it's not fed organic and they're treated terribly, and they're in little tiny cages, and it's from the worst offenders, that's now considered safe for organic production. And so BuildASoil has drawn a line in the sand, and we will not cross it. And I can't wait to talk a little bit more about ingredients when we get to every bag here. But the beginning of this video is about taking the sample and showing that, and then we're gonna get the results soon. And we're gonna go over every single result and every single bag on this video. So it might be a long video, but what we promise is at the very end of this, a full spreadsheet comparing everything. We'll have it available for download somehow, but I want you to be able to see the data. And so whether or not you think I'm biased because we have a soil company, the data will be totally transparent. I'm taking the samples from these randomly purchased bags, we're sending it off, and of course, the companies could have different results from different bags. So this isn't the end all be all. This is like a snapshot, and it's gonna allow me to really talk about these things with you. But I get it, right? I'm biased. The challenge I have is that the bias comes from the desire to be the best. The reason we're doing this is to improve our product, to better solve your problems as a grower, so we can make a better product. And I don't know many people that are willing to spend hundreds of dollars, probably $1,000 on soil testing, across the board for the worm castings and all the different potting soils, just to provide the information for free so that we can all learn. And so I hope that you take it for what it is. I'm really excited to do this, so let's get started. I'm gonna start from left to right, talk about them, and we're gonna take samples. So let's get going. On the end, one of the things we did is we asked Patreon which soils would they wanna see. And I was thinking it would be like the Fox Farm, right? The Happy Frog. We even wanna mix the two together and get like a sample of both because a lot of people requested that. That's kind of a beginner recipe. But I had a lot of people say, look, when I first started, I went to Home Depot and I bought anything that said organic on it. So we've got black and gold, natural and organic. We've got the Kellogg Raised Bed and Potting Mix Organic Plus over there from Home Depot. We've got the Near Source Organics All Natural Raised Bed and Container Mix. And so the reason why these are included is, I think a lot of people, when they started growing their own, they're like, well, man, look at that, organic, good to go. And they grab it at Home Depot, they start growing, and they start running into problems. And that's when they may investigate some of these more premium brands. And then when they realize that they have to buy other feeds on top of that, then they get into the whole hydro world, and they oftentimes are left wondering, is there a better way? And many times that's when people find BuildASoil. They realize that they can grow this just like grandma's tomatoes. When you make compost-rich, rock dust-rich potting soil that really does the job like a garden, you don't have to do much and you get really, really good results. And so when we compare all of these, I'm suspecting between these different brands, we're gonna see massively different results in soil testing, and I can't wait to find out. So I got my shears. I'm gonna start one by one and open them. I've got a scooper cup to keep them clean, so each bag I will be using a clean cup to take the sample from so I don't cross-contaminate. I'm gonna label the first one here, and it's gonna be the Kellogg. Let's see, I wanna be very specific in case we have more than one of the same brand, because there's like a Miracle Grow here, so let's gonna do the Kellogg Organic Plus. And you can see that's the raised bed pink bag. So Kellogg OG Plus. So I'll label that, I'll put that Kellogg OG Plus on the Logan Labs test. And so you can do, on this one submission worksheet, 6 samples, and you can compare them next to each other or on their own sheet. We're gonna do them all on their own, and then I'll make a spreadsheet to compare them all together. That way it's easier. So there's the Kellogg OG Plus. Man, one thing I'm noticing while I'm in here, there's just fungus gnats flying around in here from buying all these potting soils. And so that's another thing BuildASoil really takes pride in, is one of the ingredients that we put in our potting soil, all of our recipes really, it helps stop that when we mix it. And it's a natural seed meal, and it does inhibit the growth of all the larvae. And then if you happen to have bought other potting soils and they have gnats, we have a really good solution with the WDG 3000. Check it out at BuildASoil. It's literally eliminated gnats from my life, and so it's all natural. I haven't seen them in a long time, so having all these brands in here and seeing the gnats, it's like, we gotta get these out of here. All right, I'm gonna open this bag right now. Oh, they're just climbing out of here. That's disgusting. All right, well, that is literally infested. I don't even wanna keep going. I feel like I shouldn't have brought this in the building. But I mean, this is part of the experience. If you go to Home Depot and buy stuff, this might happen to you. And so we've got solutions, okay? But a lot of times the best solution is preventative and not getting started that way, but it is what it is. I'm gonna be doing the test. I'd like to just seal that thing up or treat it with our gnat stuff, but I don't wanna negatively affect anything. In fact, after I'm done with these samplings, I'll probably put it in a trash bag or something just to keep the gnats down, but this is bad. All right, now you need a couple cups. Okay, for each sample. So I just wanna make sure you get a similar volume. We'll do the texture look on there, but I was kind of surprised to see all that woody material in there that looks like unfinished. Usually that robs nitrogen and causes problems. We'll discuss it. But let's get this sealed up. Okay. Okay, number 1 down. That is gross. Oh man, I'm offended. All right, I'm just gonna go in order then. So the next one is the Gaia Green. You may have heard of them. Gaia Green Organics. I see a lot of people tagging them along with BuildASoil products. So it was high on the list of people wanting to test this living soil. We used to use some Gaia Green products, but they sold out and they're no longer owned by the same company. And it's wild. You look on the bag And I was trying to find information, and it's like, oh, you have to go to, what is it, Hydro Farm? Yeah, Hydro Farm, to get the info. And I was kind of surprised to find that the ingredients online didn't match what was on the bag, so we'll discuss that later. But that's the other thing. If it's some massive company, who do you call and ask the questions to? How do you get how do you learn more? And so that's part of when you get really into this stuff and you care, you want to know. And so I may reach out to find about those ingredient discrepancies. I'm sure there's a clear answer. Sometimes it's just labeling. But this one was a big one. And when I looked at ingredients, I wasn't that stoked on the ingredients, and we'll talk about it. However, it says living soil, and so we want to test it. Those are some nice shears. All right, let's label it before I scoop. This is going to be the Gaia. Clean cup here. All right, well, that looks better. Some big chunks, but definitely, I mean, this is totally obviously the Kellogg. It's a very different type of recipe for raised beds. And so this is going to be very interesting for me to see. All right, now all of these are just randomly bought from Amazon, couple from a local retailer. They just, carry it at the garden store down the street, so it's pretty easy for me to grab. All right, there's the Gaia. Stack these. And next is gonna be the Miracle-Gro, and it's this organic raised bed and garden soil. And I'll be showing you the full bag when we open it to show you the texture after we get the samples back. So Miracle-Gro. I'm just gonna write Miracle-Gro. I could have just done all this off camera, and started the episode, but I feel like whether you watch this part or we speed it up, I just wanted to show you that I'm taking all these samples from these bags we bought. Big thing here is just transparency, and we've got them. I've got to do it. Might as well turn the camera on. I'm scooping a little bit down. I kind of scoop off the top, and then I go into the hole that I made there. I have to vacuum, huh? Okay. All right. There's the Miracle-Gro. Would not recommend. We'll talk about why. All right, what's the next one? We've got the Near Source Organics. Made at home is best. Gnats are flying out of it. It could just be from that raised bed one, so I'm not gonna place any blame. It just happens. But since it's a major problem, and one of our goals is to overcome problems for growers so that we can get more people doing this, being independent, growing their own, you get better results. It's cheaper, save a ton of money. You can share it with your friends. So we don't want to create problems. We don't want to create gnat issues, right? Oh man, they're just flying out of there. Yeah, that's disgusting. Label it Near Source. So this is the Near Source. Clean cup, get in there a little bit. Yeah, so far the worst have been this Near Source and the Kellogg's. The other two didn't have gnats, but I mean, maybe from these bags, but like, you open these and it is just bad. Okay. Next, we're gonna do Bio365. You guys may have heard about them. They're, I think they make in Colorado. They talk about being a living soil, but that term was created by a lot of us based on how we use the ingredients. And it's been kind of greenwashed and hijacked by other people who want to copy. And I don't think they advertise in the same space. I've not used their product, but I've seen some customers using it. And when I look into it, it just does not look like a living soil recipe to me at all. And we're gonna go over ingredients and everything, but it is a respected company within the industry, and so I cannot wait to see what the results are like. Maybe they're way better than the other ones. And part of me is just so excited to see how that happens, especially some of the ones I have used, like the 707 and the Happy Frog and all that. I just can't wait to see what the Logan Labs profile looks like. But Bio365 is next. Let's label it Bio365. Now they have a lot of recipes, so this is their Bio Flour, which is what people wanted to see. So this one does not have gnats flying out of it like the others. So I think the source is more from this pink one and that other one from Home Depot. Now, once it's in the room, they can kind of go through the perforations because soil has to breathe, but I'm not seeing anything crazy in here. All right, camera died for just a second. Great one is about to take the Bio365 sample, so just got the bag open. Looks a little bit fluffier, these long cocoa fiber hairs. We'll talk about that. It's gonna be really fun to compare textures. Awesome, got the Bio365. Okay, what's next? What's next? Fox Farm. All right, now I'm gonna do Fox Farm, then Happy Frog, and then I'm gonna make a sample bag with the two mixed 50-50 because I just gotta see the difference in results. It's gonna be fun. So let's do Fox Farm OF, okay? Ocean Forest. Oh yeah, that looks like what I'm used to seeing. I've used lots of this stuff back in the day. Leave that in there. Okay, Fox Farm Ocean Forest. And let's do Happy Frog. Happy Frog. Nice and moist compared to some of the others. All right, there's the Happy Frog. Now, before I forget, I'm gonna make the combo. So this is gonna be the Fox Farm OF plus HF. Ocean Forest plus Happy Frog. Okay? I'm not weighing it or being anything exact. I'm just gonna go volume of the cup. 1 cup of Happy Frog. And then I'm gonna use the other cup from the Ocean Forest. 1 cup of Ocean Forest. Okay, and ditch those cups now. What I'm gonna do is keep some of the air in here and get a really homogeneous blend. That way if they take a scoop out of here, they're getting the 50-50, just like your plants would see. I'm excited to see what this looks like too. It'll also be fun because if you've used these recipes, and you'll know what the results were like. A lot of people have experience. We'll now get to see what the lab says. So there we go, nice and mixed up. I'm gonna go ahead and let the air out just for the volume when we go to ship them. Don't want them exploding. Let's keep going down the line. So we've got Coast of Maine, and that's a pretty popular one. I really like this company. Got nothing bad to say about them. We'll look at ingredients and all that stuff, but this is one of the highly recommended companies on the forums back in the day for their compost from the East Coast before I started BuildASoil. And so I'm so curious to see what we find out here from a really respectable company. Like, what does it look like? So, Coast of Maine. Okay, and it's their Stonington Blend Organic and Natural Growers Mix. So, Stoning. Oh wow, that looks beautiful. Okay. Lots of perlite. We don't really use perlite in our mix unless it's for seedlings, but it's pretty standard in the industry, so kind of expect to see it. Stonington Blend, done. All right, we're almost done. Then we're gonna take the BuildASoil samples. I grabbed a couple bags just off the shelf here in the retail store, just like a customer would come grab or like we'd ship out to you, as opposed to pulling from the bulk tote. Bulk totes are normally where we scoop from the samples before we bag because we do preliminary testing. Part of the new bag too, by the way, when we're getting all these new bags, is we're gonna be able to put batch numbers right on here, and then you'll be able to see the actual soil test for your real batch number, which is pretty cool. Always wanted to do it, and we're getting closer, so. Okay, 707. Next. Used a lot of this, man, the big bags. You can literally just like get their 30-gallon ones or whatever, just open it and plant into it. And I always thought that was pretty cool. I've run lots of grows in them. You can even find like an old Vimeo video from me where I'm showing worms underneath the mulch layer. I'm literally grabbing a 707 bag and peeling it back. So, you know, a lot of this, although we have a soil company, like I admire and look up to a lot of these entrepreneurs that started these businesses and, you know, those that came before us. And so fascinated to see what the results look like as we put a lot of hard work into BuildASoil. Okay, so 707, Just making sure I'm not getting distracted here. Keeping organized. All right, 707, done. I'm gonna get those other gnat offenders outside, just to get them out of here, and then I'll roll up the other bags. That way we don't make it worse before we get started. I'm not gonna do a growth trial in here. You guys have probably used these products and know what to expect. However, the data is gonna be the most fascinating to me. And of course, like sometimes someone can show you data on a meal, but it might not be food you would ever eat. And so some of these are ingredients we just would never touch as a company, but they're pretty standard in the industry. So we'll discuss that. And I'm very excited to see its impact on the soil test numbers. I'm curious if these big boys have any nutrients in there at all or what it's gonna look like. Almost done, so next is black gold. Pretty standard, a lot of growers would recommend some sort of mixture of black gold and something else. So curious, like the rest of them, what it looks like. See, it looks beautiful. That's what black gold looks like. We'll show you the texture later, but I've used lots of black gold too. Still, not a living soil, but pretty. Dark in color, all that perlite. Okay, did I get every single bag except for the BuildASoil? It looks like it, okay. So let's label this one light. I'm not sure what to call it, so we know which light sample this is. So let me look at my phone and we'll just light, today's May 7th, so we'll do light 5/7/25, okay? Light 5/7/25. That way when I get the results, I know it's directly from this. And then we're gonna do 3.0 5/7/25. So 3.0. Oh no, that is a living soil. Obviously, I'm biased, but I see no perlite. I see the pumice, I see the compost, I see the rice hulls. Okay, clean cup. This is 3.0, that's 3.0. This is scary for me. I'm having a blast, but like no matter what, we put so much work into this. And so it's kind of like, of course, every time a customer buys, our biggest fear in the world, as a grower, as an entrepreneur, that like my cell phone number's out there, people have been talking to me on the phone since I started the company. We just want you to succeed. And so it's so important that we do these types of things so we can learn, even though it's scary. All right, BuildASoil light. Okay, we did it. All right, well that's what I needed to go over today. I wanted to show you that we're taking all the samples, we're sending them to the lab, we're spending hundreds of dollars, we're gonna get a standard soil test. If you don't know, a standard soil test from Logan Labs uses the Malic 3. Really what that means, if you're just wondering if the soil's good, they basically take strong acid and they dissolve the soil completely. And they tell you everything that's in it. Everything, like, even if it's not available to the plant, what was in that soil if the plant had to mine it forever using biology or however you got it out. They tell you the totals. Then we do a saturated paste test. And a saturated paste test, you know, if you're on a farm, you can send your water and your soil and they tell you how they work together. But for a standard potting soil, what we're gonna do is have Logan Labs just use clean water. And they're gonna use that clean water and they're gonna use these soil samples and they're gonna pour it on there and they're gonna see what's available to the plant from the water instead of the acid. And so to me, the pinnacle is when you can get a soil test that looks good for the long term. And the saturated paste test shows that it's in the same balance when you plant into it. That's phenomenal. And that's the gold standard. That's what we look for here at BuildASoil. That's what we work hard on our own potting soils. That's why we publish the results so transparently. I have no idea how any of these are gonna stack up, if they're gonna be 10 times worse, 10 times better, or very different from each other. But we're gonna find it out all together on camera as we wrap up this episode. So right now, I'm just gonna turn the camera off and we're gonna get back after it very soon as I get the results. Thanks for watching, and I'd say see you next time, but we're just gonna keep this thing going so it's one big episode. Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil YouTube video. today we've got part 2 in our video series. We may combine these because it's so exciting, but part 1 was us actually getting the bags of soil open, taking the samples and sending them to the lab. So what am I talking about? If you've seen part 1, then you know that we tested a whole bunch of different commonly available potting soils. And the reason that we did this is we see a lot of times people think they're not good at growing or gardening. And many times it may be that they purchased a potting soil that was locally available based on the price, based on what it was marketed for. And maybe they didn't use it for that purpose, which we'll talk about, but maybe they didn't have good results. And oftentimes that would start with like a root-bound plant, maybe available at the grocery store or the hardware store or Home Depot or something. So you start with the plant that's already declining in health or root-bound, and then you put it into soil that may not be ideal, and you think, man, I just can't do this. And so the other thing I want to talk about today is ingredients, because it's going to be a long video. BuildASoil has done this for over a decade, and over the last 12 years, we've learned a lot about the industry, about how potting soil is made. Most companies don't make their own. We make all of our own. We have control over the ingredients, and the ingredients are very, very important to me. The reason why is, personally, for my family, for my kids, for my wife, we eat good ingredients that I believe are part of why we're also healthy. And as I get older, I'm 41 this year, I'll be 42 in September, I've noticed more of these things to be true from experience instead of just hopeful optimism that this was the right way. And so now I want to start sharing this with a little more conviction and saying, look, these ingredients matter. There's so much that we're learning about how a lot of the toxic ingredients in our environment are affecting all of our bodies and how that's affecting hormones, how that's affecting cancer and many other health concerns. So I could do an entire episode about the ingredients and how this trickles down. Just know that if you're someone who is growing food for your family or cannabis, flowers, and you use daily or you use pretty often or you're making medicine, just know that these ingredients truly matter in a bigger way than most of these suppliers and manufacturers are willing to discuss. To me, it's a big, big deal. And so we're going to talk about the ingredients. We're going to go over every lab test. I did a couple of things to keep this as fair as possible, and I want to be very clear up front. All of the potting soils that we tested, now if you've seen the first one, I have all the bags, they're down here, right? So like, here's black gold, it's open because we took the test out of it. You can see all the brands in the video. I'll probably end up grabbing a bag or two to read the ingredients as part of that discussion, so we'll see them in a little bit. But to make it fair, I want to be very clear that this is an internal scoring system that we use, meaning if I bought a bag of potting soil at Home Depot and I'm using this scoring card, which I will share with everyone so they can see how we scored. I did not know what the results would look like until we're done. These soils may not be designed for this. And so part of it is to say, look, if you just fixed this one thing, you could now use the soil, or if you corrected it for your purpose. And so any soil brand that's out there, I really enjoy working with other businesses, and I do not ever want to bash another business. So this has nothing to do with that. This is education. I'm going to be as non-biased and as fact-based as possible, but you know, we own BuildASoil. I own BuildASoil. And so it's obviously something that I think you should look for other videos too. Like, I sell this product and I'm giving you the information. And so I'm giving you facts you can research. That's how I keep it, so that I'm transparent. And then those that do the research, they'll be able to communicate with me and understand that, okay, this is real stuff that he's testing for. This makes sense. He's not just saying, hey, this is good, that is bad, right? And so that's very important that I want to be transparent about. You know, there's certain times I'm bashing an ingredient and it's kind of personal. Not everybody agrees, right? So this is our internal standard and this is our scoring system. And the scoring system is skewed and biased towards annual flowering plants and growing something that's very hungry. And so we're going to discuss that as well, because we use Logan Labs soil testing. We sent all of these for a standard soil test and a saturated paste test, and in one instance we had to do an AA 8.2. That might sound confusing, but I promise by the time you're done watching this video, you're gonna have an entire new understanding about why we use soil testing, what it means, and some of the things that it can't really do that we encourage as part of the BuildASoil way, and why our followers, our customers, our friends are having such good results. Is we have some secret hacks that we'll share with you. And the other thing is, although there's some lower scores and on some of these soils, I'm confident we can make any of it work. I even have a soil test from our vegetable farm from when we first tested, and while a lot of the numbers are really good, there's some that aren't. And so I don't believe there's ever gonna be there's no perfect score, okay? So that's why this also isn't very fair. Very high standards to get 100%. It's impossible. There's no score that will ever be 100%. So while you could say, hey, 90 to 100% is like an A in school, an A soil is phenomenal, but there's never gonna be 100%. So the bell curve should almost be adjusted, and it would adjust a lot of these grades. But I think this conversation, being transparent about it, knowing that all of these potting soils will work, it's just that when you're investing your hard-earned dollars, it's up to us to show why BuildASoil is a higher value product, where we put ingredients that we care about along with soil balancing, and we create a transparent end product. The other reason I want to make this video is for education as far as learning these target values. I really do think that this will make it easier. Instead of having to buy a soil test interpretation, you might be able to say, hey, look, you can grow even in a C soil, no problem, with a couple of corrections, with a score that's not that great. And so part of this is empowering you to not blame the soil any longer. Just know what may be likely, right, at Home Depot or at Amazon when you buy a potting soil. But you can now go through our scorecard, score your own soil test with a rating of 1 through 10 on every parameter for 2 different tests. And then you can give yourself an honest feedback. And even without knowing anything, you can say, hey, if I've scored 5 out of 10 on this parameter, why? You can go look and you can improve it. And so I think this is a great guide without getting really weirdly mathematic. It's all based on math. We could do videos on soil testing, but there's a lot of misinformation because most of the soil testing is based on farm soil, not living soil. And BuildASoil has designed our potting soil to be more high bricks, which is a high calcium, low potassium and sodium. Part of the reason why is many of them are loaded in potassium, and we would prefer to establish the mulch layer. And we have craft blend and compost that go there, and that can really raise the soluble potassium, as well as coconut water and the Thermex or the Kuyaha. Many of these will have potassium, and we've designed our soil so that you start off with calcium being front loaded, and we'll discuss it, and then you can build the mulch layer for constant fertility. So we don't even score perfect on this test based on how I have designed the soil. But when you look at who owns some of these companies, it's like, who's designing this stuff? What do they even grow, right? And how do we affect change on it if there's a product we like that we really want to use and it's not got an ingredient we like? Many people resort to making their own potting soil. And I think part of BuildASoil's popularity is because we basically make homemade potting soil here. And it's a huge difference for those that follow based on ingredients and testing. And I hope to relay that to you because there's so much marketing out there. It's hard to get real information. So let's get started. The big soil test. Okay, lots to discuss. I mentioned this is gonna be a long video, but I'm trying to be organized about the way I deliver the information. I'm trying to decide right now. Should we just go over scorecards? I think that would be a little inflammatory in the sense that like, that's all you're gonna hear is the scorecard. So I think what I wanna do is teach first. And so here's what I intend to do. We're gonna have a very brief discussion on ingredients, and we'll go through all of the potting soils and we're gonna discuss the ingredients. So if you wanna get to the report cards and you wanna look at the soil testing, go ahead and skip ahead. But I didn't go over ingredients, and some of you might just stop at ingredients and say, I don't care what the soil tests look like. I don't want that ingredient in my household. Once you learn, you have the burden of knowledge. And then if you're already, like, we're hypocrites, meaning if you care about organic, or if you eat grass-fed beef, or if you choose free-range eggs, or if you have your own chickens because you want the ethical treatment of them, we oftentimes can't follow that across every part of our life, or we would never get out of bed in the morning. We have to have some compromises. And part of what I look at as I have lots going on in my life is where's the weakest link? And so why this is important to me is I am a daily cannabis user. And so this has a higher percentage of importance to me when it comes to all of those things considered, as well as my food. I eat food every day. So food's very important to me, but I can't always win there. And so I'm willing to compromise sometimes. And you should be willing to, right? I don't want you to be living in fear. But with the burden of knowledge, it enables you to make better decisions when you can, and don't feel guilty about the rest. And that's just another thing I wanted to mention. So we're gonna go over ingredients. Ingredients, if I can spell. I wanna put this for reference. So we go over that. And then next, after we do ingredients, I have to do some explanation because I think this is gonna lead to some aha moments. It's gonna lead to a paradigm shift for people that are watching this, and they may not understand how much work we put behind the scenes. And so I'm going to go over soil test paradigm. Okay, and this is gonna be the standard, the saturated. We'll do a little excerpt on the AA 8.2. And then we're gonna talk about some new subjects here, okay? Many of you will not have heard about this, some of you will, and I'm excited. I spoke about this at the soil conference and I don't think anybody really caught on. I think it's very important and it's one of the keys to living soil. Okay, it's called endocytosis. And another word for it specifically in plants that's been created is called rhizophagy. Some of you may have heard of that. It became popular in the living soil crowd. I'm gonna take you back to endocytosis, which is an explanation for the rhizophagy. And it sounds really complicated, but you're going to have some ahas when it comes to how this all happens. And I'm gonna make it very, very simple, explaining how we go from a soil test to what's water soluble, and in between how the plant can maybe eat more than just water soluble ions, which has long been the argument for the hydro crowd. They say that in organic, once the biology is done with it, the only way the plant can eat is it has to be in chemical form. Now you probably can't read my writing, but basically that's the argument from hydro guys. Well, that's a lot of work to go through all the biology. You have no control. And then at the end of the day, even though it's organic, it still has to be broken down to its chemical form, the carbon removed, the nutrient ion has to be available for the plant to take it up. And I don't believe that at all. And people that garden the natural way, they've seen it with their own eyes. They'll agree with that too. They may not have an excellent answer to it. When we're done today, you're gonna have the answer and you can talk with your friends about it. And I think that'll be pretty cool. Biology is incredible. I learned the trichome head has biology in it through some of the pursuit of this information. So certainly like our gut, the roots are working with biology as well. And that's a big key little secret tip. But I swear, stay ahead. We're gonna be going over some of the best information I've ever covered. And then we're going over soil tests on all these bags. And I'm gonna give a report card out, so to speak, against our own internal standards. I'm not trying to, say these soils won't work. This is just a score out of 260 possible points, okay? So when we're done here with the soil test paradigm, okay, what I wanna do is explain how we came up with the target scorecard. Okay, because there's many teachers out there, they're gonna have their own targets for what a soil test is, but we came up with a target scorecard and I believe it was very fair. And you can reference this to see if our scorecard is unfair or is off in any area. And I'd love to get feedback from you in the comments. I suspect this is gonna be, lead to some heated arguments over what these test numbers might need to be. And I think that's great because when we start to get specific on some of these scoring methods, there's gonna have to be answers. And the black belt answer is always, it depends. There is gray area, especially in multiple causality within nature. And so this is not black and white. I just wanna keep saying that because it's so important that if anybody watches this, they get the feeling that we're not trying to bash any company, that we're trying to share information, and this is how it comes out on the scorecard. So we're gonna go over our scorecard. Then I think we're gonna have the entire picture set and we're gonna go over all tests. So you can just skip there if you really want to, but wait, there is so much good information that I wanna relay to you. It's really gonna help you. And so I'd love feedback on that too. And if you're watching this, I want you to watch it all, please. Okay, let's go through this. I need to be succinct so that I can be as quick as possible. I feel like I could spend an hour on each one of these and I'm gonna lose a lot of you. And so if you like this, let's talk about what the classroom might have, what kind of podcasts we could do as far as going in specifics for those of you that like to geek out. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep it as basic as possible today. We can definitely go deeper, okay? So let's get started. I've got the soil ingredients discussion about what goes in your soil. You can go to BuildASoil.com and you can get this 11-page report for free. And the way you do it is go to BuildASoil.com, educational, and it says avoid these ingredients. And then you can download the PDF, Soil Ingredients, a discussion about what goes in your soil. And so I'm gonna go really quickly through this because a lot of you have heard about these. I'm gonna give a basic breakdown because it's important to me, and then we're gonna go through some of the bags of soil, and then we're gonna be on the next step. Soil ingredients discussion. When building a living organic potting soil, there are several key differences compared to traditional potting soils. Many of these were not designed to be a living soil. And so a living soil, we go for long-lasting ingredients. We're not gonna throw it away. And so instead of just having some organic matter to hold your roots and a light charge of nutrients, we balance the nutrients. We use pumice that, instead of perlite, which breaks down quickly, the pumice lasts forever. It's a volcanic material. We use copious amounts of rock dust. We use premium compost that's full of biology. We use biochar that's high carbon that houses this. And we create a little bit of an ecosystem that you're going to be able to keep for the rest of your life. So if you're comparing the cost of a potting soil for a few bucks at the grocery store out front during gardening season, the ingredients are like atrocious in some of those. We're talking human biosolids manure from the city. Like, it could be bad, right? We didn't test anything like that. We tested better products. But then you start to look at what the ions might be in there, and you start to get educated about like the ingredients, and then you compare it and you go, well, why is this one so expensive? And then you may look like, well, does it matter? That looks organic. This looks organic. Why am I spending so much? And I think that if you learn that you're going to keep this forever, and you invest very little and it works for a long period of time, it can be seen as a much higher value. So I wanna share that with you because, you know, when I look at how many ounces you can pull down from a grow, how much I go through and what that costs, it's very, very clear for the average grower that has a little bit of a routine with their flowers, that it's too expensive to go even at the low costs. Because it's expensive for your health. It's expensive not knowing what's been sprayed on it, the molds, the ingredients and stuff. So when you grow your own, you really make it healthier for the daily. Then you can control the ingredients, which is worthwhile, and then your cost goes almost to nothing in comparison to purchasing it. And I think that's great because it removes anxiety and guilt over spending money on this plant. And I think that that can be a huge energy lift and energy that's important to me as well. We're not throwing it away. The ingredients are different when it comes just to the structure. Premium compost, lots of rock dust that makes it heavy, pumice that doesn't go away. Challenge is that makes it heavier, and that's bad for freight. And a lot of these companies that ship, you know, truckloads to Home Depots everywhere and the big box stores, they're all about the weight and the freight, not about the actual structural component. We're all about making the best, just like you'd make at home. Be cautious of stuff that's advertised water only. This is not true in the sense that if I take a little bit of their potting soil and say it's water only and I grow a 10-foot tall plant right out of this cup, it's gonna run out. It's not water only. So it's all relative, right? It depends is the answer. And we'll explain, and then you'll be able to put that together. How can I do water only successfully? We absolutely can show you. It's one of our core tenets. Okay, ingredients. We avoid using common GMO crops, and ethical sourcing is important to us. So consider this. But when you go and you buy organic food at the grocery store, we all know that may not be the best. Like, at least they didn't use all these toxic ingredients. It's probably lower in pesticide use, even though some are approved. But at least it was organic. So meaning, if you buy grass-fed organic beef, or if you buy, like, the eggs is weird. The specific words they can use on eggs could mean very little compared to what you think as far as the space the chicken gets. But when you buy those, you at least know they're being fed non-GMO crops. They're being fed organic feed. That's what produces the meat that you then eat. And there's been a big movement. A lot of people are going towards like grass-fed beef because it has multiple stomachs, where the chicken is just fed corn, maybe organic corn in some instances, where you get organic chicken, and the DNA more loosely resembles the corn versus when it's worked through the stomachs. So there's like so much conversation we have just about the food side. And then you come over to soil and you go, okay, all the most atrocious chicken farms, all the most atrocious pig and cattle farms that are just big slaughterhouses that do hormones and have GMO crops that they feed to them, those are considered organic when it comes to potting soil. And so if you're someone who's opted out of that, cares about animal cruelty and doesn't want to support those, then you shouldn't be buying those ingredients. Then on top of that, we don't know enough about how much these small amounts could persist all the way through into the product and how to test for that. And we're constantly finding new things out. So just opting out is a really, really good way to go. Proponents of the ingredients from those farms, they'll say, look, what do you mean it's not organic? I bought chicken manure. It says in the potting soil, Miracle-Gro Organic, using poultry manure. That has to be from organic chickens, right? No, it does not have to be from anything organic. Once it's ground up dead animal and excrement, or parts of animals, that's considered organic waste, and that can be used for organic production. And that's where it can be pretty toxic. And so it's important that we know that. Many of these brands use those ingredients because they're cheap as fuck. And you can get lots of them to be consistent on a soil test and get the same ingredient for pennies, and then you can call it living soil. But when BuildASoil was part of the movement on the forums from the living soil, from the original living organic soil thread, the ingredients were huge in that. It wasn't living soil if you used that shit. And so to see other companies purporting themselves to be living soil and breaking the core tenets means that they're greenwashing the use of that term. And it's okay because people may think that that's their version of what living soil is to them. And we're representing what it is to us. And that's what we're sharing with you. We found most of our customers agree. If you're gonna go to living soil, animal cruelty should be out of it. Once you've owned chickens and cattle and stuff and you've lived that life, you can see how terrible it can be to raise the animals. Okay, all right, so now let's see what's there. So bone meal, ethical sourcing issues. There is none. So people will be like, well, I found a supplier for bone meal and they say it's from organic cattle. Bullshit. The reason I say that is every time I found this, I reached out and it was a third party selling a product and they just didn't know what they didn't know. They thought it meant organic. When I pointed out who their supplier was and that it was not organic, they would immediately say, yeah, you're right. It isn't. And so it's frustrating. I have not found an organic bone meal. So we use fish bone meal. It's from the ocean, wild harvested. We can test it. Obviously, the ocean isn't the perfect source of cleanliness, but the cruelty factor is very different. And so, fish farm stuff, terrible. A lot of times fed dog food. We don't eat farmed fish when it comes to like farmed salmon and all that. If you do, look into it, see if you still want to. But bone meal, okay? We don't use it. Blood meal, same thing. There's no organic source for this and it's really high nitrogen. It's not like a slow release nutrient in the same way. And so in any case, if you have your access to organic blood meal from your own farm or something, sure. Feather meal, same thing. It's a high nitrogen used in a lot of these potting soil companies. Just look into feather meal, look into what it is, look into how terrible these chicken farms are that they come from. I used a lot of stuff, like used Stutzman's back in the day following the Tom Hill organic soil recipe. And I thought that the Stutzman's chicken manure was organic. And when I found out it wasn't, I was kind of pissed. And so that led to me caring about this stuff, and that led to BuildASoil being where it is today. And so we have to remain true to that because it's important to a lot of people and it's important to me. Perlite, we don't use it. We started to use it recently in like our seedling soil or as a component. What I mean is we mainly use the pumice and rice hulls. Rice hulls eventually break down. So kind of like perlite, we usually use more pumice. That way some portion of the aeration does not break down completely, but it might have its place. Coconut coir versus peat moss, there's a big discussion on that. And I think that I just want to mention that because without reading this information, a lot of you may be prone to marketing that says peat moss is bad. And that's different where you are in the globe. So overseas, over the pond, it might be very, very bad. Here in the United States, with access to Canadian sphagnum peat moss, it's very, very different. And I would encourage you to use peat moss. We use tiny amounts of cocoa coir and the quality can fluctuate greatly depending on origin and brand and import. It's just kind of the wild west out there as far as how people get cocoa coir, wash it, where it comes from. And it's not like these coconuts are being grown organically. And so not always, right? It infuses a whole different matrix of thought into the cocoa coir side where the peat moss is just wild harvested from nature. And there's very responsible use of it. And so you can do your own research on that, all right? Soft rock phosphate, hard phosphate, triple rock phosphate, soft rock phosphate, there's cadmium, arsenic, and other heavy metals in it. When we first started BuildASoil, we were warned about it, but we didn't know what levels. And so we did research and we found a couple sources that were very low. And when we looked at what the comparative numbers were, they were astronomically different. So if you get something from the wrong region, I think there was a Nevada mine for some calphos that they would just sell to you for organic farming that was like hundreds, if not thousands of parts per million in cadmium and arsenic and mainly cadmium. And it's just terrible. And I think a lot of the tobacco use that leads to cancer is how the tobacco might be grown because people that smoke tobacco smoke the leaf. The heavy metals are stored in the leaf. In cannabis, the resin that we're after doesn't hold it at all, but the leaf can, and there are leaf portions that make up that flower. And so it's very important. We in fact eliminated it completely, even though there are some low cadmium sources that are probably safe. It does fluctuate. And so when we had heavy metal scares for commercial rules for cannabis growing years back, we identified certain ingredients that can fluctuate a little bit and we mostly cut them out. And so there's alternatives out there and that's in the report. But we found really good ways to do phosphorus without having those heavy metal issues, and that's awesome. Poultry litter, I already talked about this. I don't like to see poultry litter, poultry manure, feather meal, any of that stuff from these chickens. They're just fed GMO corn. Now, why does that matter? Some people are like, well, does the GMO stuff get into the chicken? It's more that as a soil company and perpetuating this information and sharing the movement, if we all grew our own food, it'd be better. But let's say we're looking at larger acreage. Annual flowering plants pull a lot from the soil. It's hard. There's some better models out there, but when you look at corn, it's pretty agreeable that it's like, hey, thousands of acres of GMO corn are not good. And so those of you that are brand new to GMOs, you might think, well, what about golden rice? And what about stuff I heard in school, how GMOs are gonna save everything? I think it's complete bullshit. I haven't seen anything good come from it. But instead of me thinking, the facts are that the GMO crops we're talking about, the soy and the corn, they're sprayed with Roundup. That's what they're GMO for. And so those are terrible in the sense that there's tons of public information about how toxic these chemicals can be. And so whether you believe it persists in the corn through the chicken into the actual potting soil, into your lungs, or whether you're like, look, it's clean. I believe that it's cleaned up by nature somehow. However, I don't think it's good to be voting with our dollars for thousands of acres of GMO corn to limited landowners and the big corporations that do that and all of the chemicals being used. And so we just don't do it. And that's why Miracle Grow has the poultry litter in there, because I'm sure as a big company, where else are you gonna get a cheap ingredient that could be organic? You can't. And since it is approved for organic use, you can say organic and sell the product, right? Meat meal. It's kind of wild. You'll see it out there. Seriously, it's a byproduct of the meat industry. Biosolids. It's human manure from the local composting from the city. It's absolutely disgusting. They'll say it's safe. I don't believe it is at all. There's lots of pharmaceuticals in there. There's tons of research on the water in the pipes right now from all of the birth control being taken, that there's actually birth control in the water. It's affecting hormones. And so when you think about just taking human manure and using it, it's like, even if it was your own, like on a farm, you wouldn't use it for cannabis. And so none of these soils have that at all. So don't think I'm saying that. However, some of the bigger brands, you kind of got to be suspect of. Who knows what they're doing? And when you look at the ones that are using it, maybe it's not advertised as a garden soil. Maybe it just says topsoil. But when I see the masses pulling up to the grocery store and spending $2 to $3 a bag, I'm like, the bag, the palletization, the wrapping, the delivery, like how do they get it for that cost? Oh, that's disgusting. You can read the ingredients and many people don't know what's in it. And they're using it for many things without understanding. So that's a huge one. Sand, it can be useful as a drainage aid, but you'll see a lot of companies overuse it to kind of add weight and drainage. Usually though, you're not gonna see a lot of it just because you can only use so much by percent before it adds too much weight. And obviously these companies want it to be lightweight. Wood bark products. So there's a discussion on it. Wood bark is commonly used. You'll see on the soil test, some of the ones that are higher in wood bark were very low in nitrogen because the high carbon from the wood will rob nitrogen and it can starve some plants depending on what its intended use is. And that's why some people might buy a potting soil that has all the wood in it and think, man, I just can't grow. Well, our annual flowering plants need more nutrient than that. And a lot of times just understanding that might help you make a better decision. The other thing is a lot of times wood is cheap filler. Depending on where you are in the country, you can get it basically for free. And then you mix it in by percentage in your potting soil. And if you're somebody who focuses on building for math instead of building for what works, I've worked with people like this before. They build a spreadsheet and they say, yeah, but if I add 15% wood product, and if I add 10% of this, it lowers my cost by X amount. And I'm like, yeah, but now your soil is gonna fail our potting soil test. And now it's not gonna be worth selling to consumers because there's tons of potting soils on the market already that chop up waste that's cheap and sell it for a profit. But they got to do millions, right? And I just think it's kind of insane. So dolomite lime, we don't use it. It hardens the soil over time. We're keeping our soil forever. The way it breaks down from calcium to magnesium, it just is not good as far as the ratio that's there over the long term. And so we avoid it. In the report, it talks about ideal soil from Michael Estera. We'll reference him a little bit later, but all of this is in that free report. Cottonseed meal. I mean, just right away, you got to know that GMO, as far as cotton, it's one of the worst. Especially because it's not even animal feed, it's like made for clothing. And so tons of people, like I have a lot of organic clothing, but it's one of the areas I'm a hypocrite. I've been thinking about it, it's been kind of bothering me more. Maybe I need to do more research, but sometimes I wear these like athletic shirts because of the summer and sweat and all that. And obviously they're saying lately that some of this stuff made from plastics and the athletic wear is not good. And so maybe in the future I'll be weirder about that, but I take it as it comes and I try and make good decisions. But the cotton can be really, really, really bad. Companies like Patagonia, They changed a long time ago to organic cotton because they realized how toxic it was for the environment. And I really look up to people like that, and I think it's pretty cool. Why would I use cottonseed meal that's heavily sprayed? I mean, toxic, and used in our potting soil, okay? Fish farm waste. Man, they feed them dog food half the time. Like, I just don't like seeing fish in a barrel, fed terrible stuff and then be used by growers thinking it's the best biological thing ever. I don't know of any big fish products that are on the market as far as fish waste from fish farms that are any good. I could be wrong, right? This is my personal opinion about them. I've seen a lot of these farms that do the fish farming along with the food crops, right? And many people study it. And when you look into it, it's not something that is glamorous, I think, as far as how the food production works. So we just don't use fish waste. Now we do have a liquid fish product that's different because that's from a wild harvested dogfish that's very specific, and that is fermented and then stabilized with food grade phosphoric acid, and it really can work well. Although you can't overdo it. It's one of those that's very different from fish farm waste, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, bat guano, there's many reasons on here. You can look this one up on yourself, but we don't use it. There's a lot of environmental reasons and there's a lot of human health concerns. And this is just carryover from how people used to do things. And it's not done that way anymore for the most part. A lot of it is just left over from the 90s and early 2000s where everybody talked about guano, but we don't want to use it. There are some great companies that, say that they have access to guano that doesn't harm the ecosystem and all this. And maybe there's probably exceptions to the rule. But for the longest time, as far as the living soil forums were concerned, guano became kind of a laughing thing. And it was one of the key differences about the living organic soil was that got kind of left behind and people didn't use the bat guano. In fact, Clackamas Coot made a joke about using your own flightless bird guano, and that was just chicken manure, right? And if you have your own chickens and you feed them well, it can be an incredible resource when composted right and work through the worms or whatever. So seabird guano, there's a few reasons on there you can look into. And there's alternatives, okay? Then you have to worry about how the soil is mixed up and testing, and we go into some of that stuff, but today we'll go a little deeper on the testing. There are other ingredients out there. If I missed something that you see, in fact, I think a couple of these might have ingredients that aren't even on the list. So I'm gonna flip this and we'll put ingredients on the list. We'll do research and I'll keep my pen here and we'll take notes just in case, all right? Okay, questions, drop them in on ingredients because I think a lot of you that were like me and may have been led to believe that OMRI or organic meant that what was used was produced in that fashion. It's not. And the main reason why is this is for farming. Organic means approved under the organic guidelines of the National Organic Program. It doesn't mean organic. And those of you that care about your health, those of you that care about voting with your dollars, you're gonna find that section interesting, and I think you're gonna wanna download that report, and I'm open to questions. I love to discuss it because it's what sets us apart from a lot of other companies who say, hey, this stuff is not important, and it's much better to recycle the waste streams than let it go to waste. I'm like, yo, use that in the landscaping, not in my flowering indoor grow tent, you know what I mean? What do we have next? We talked about ingredients pretty quickly, right? But I think I did a good job not going too slow. Soil test paradigm. I can't wait to do this. We're gonna go through it. I'm just gonna take this from memory, and obviously we're gonna go over the target scorecard. So I'll put that here, and then we're gonna go over the tests. So I'll put it in order right here. This is another factor for how we made it, so I'll leave it on top. And then I'm gonna go ahead and erase this. Let me grab the cloth right now. Got one right here, just so that I could be prepared for this. Thanks for hanging out if you've been watching this long. It's really fun to get to make videos like this. And normally I just turn the camera on and we just show you what we're doing. But when I make a video like this, it's important that we get it right. And so I've been kind of waiting for this for a little while, talked about it, haven't done it. And today's a big relief in the sense that we're getting this information out there how I wanted to. And I'm really proud of it. So let's just discuss soil testing. Let's say you know nothing about a soil test. I'm just gonna go through the basics really quick. And so over here, you have soil testing. Now this is all the stuff that's in the soil, okay? And so this isn't like immediately available. And so this is almost like your investments or your savings account. And so this will only trickle into available according to, your plans, so to speak. And it's not instant. So like, for instance, let's say you own an asset and you're like, oh, I tested, I have all this money. Well, might take you a year to sell one of them. It's not liquid like cash. And so I know it's a weird reference, but when you come over here and you have the saturated paste test, okay, this is where they take deionized water, or on the farm, you can send your own farm water in, but we're talking about just for potting soil. They're gonna see what's available now, liquid, like what is in water soluble form for your plants. What are they gonna see? What are they almost gonna be force fed? Part of the discussion of the magic in the middle comes from this Humisphere book, and there's talks about virgin soil literally having no water soluble ions, and something else is at play there. And I think it's pretty amazing, and so we'll discuss that. But the belief, like I have discussed with you, is that no matter whether you're in hydro or organic soil, you have to get to water soluble form for the plants to use it. And so therefore, why wouldn't we just start in hydro? But hydro to me is more like I am in control. I've got the white lab coat on. I tell you what to do, plant. Versus like overalls and like being a steward and caring for every need that your plants could have and then letting them do their own thing. And so that's where I believe the BuildASoil way really comes into play. And what happens is there's this cycle and we're looking to perpetuate it. And so when we go get a test from the lab, we do both. And the whole idea is to score an A in both on the score, and it's almost impossible. That's what we picked up when we first started soil testing. We would go, wow, some of these soils look pretty good. Coots Recipe and others. And we're like, well, some of these, depending on the compost or ingredients, they might test kind of well, but they don't perform that well. Why? Well, we learned a lot about what was happening over here. And we also learned some truths about calcium that we're gonna go over here from a potting soil that was different. And so long story short, over 12 years of doing this, we've learned that the regular native soil that farmers use is very, very different when it comes to the high organic matter, living soil that we've created and that we're working with. And so comparing all of these as a living soil may not be that fair. So just really take that in mind when you're looking at the scorecards. But if you are after living soil and you think some of these might suffice, you need to know what might be weak. And every one of these tests could be different because not every supplier is very, I didn't do 10 tests, meaning these are random samples. Some suppliers might be more consistent, some might be wildly different depending on the inputs. Some, like Black Gold you read, they have different ingredients based on where in the country they're produced because of the volume they do. So they might be fluctuating different than these tests, okay? But the whole idea is a lot of people say, oh, my soil test looks good. Or they say, oh, this looks good. Separate, it's hard to tell if there's enough stuff here to keep in flow to keep the plant happy. And this is under the purely just soil way, not even the BuildASoil way, which has some added hacks we're gonna teach you. And we'll go over those terms and all that. We discussed the endocytosis and the rhizophagy. We're gonna get there. But this is the discussion, okay? So let me grab my rag, I'm gonna keep it over here. It helps me to kind of do these visualization things, and so maybe I could write it one more way for you to see, and then I'll try and explain it. But it's one of the things that living soil growers picked up on early that started to give us an advantage in how healthy the plants were. And once you see that, you kind of just keep going with it. And so you can almost draw it like a Venn diagram. Might be hard to see because I just wiped the board, and so now the marker is gonna be a little weird. So this would be the standard, okay? And this would be the saturated. Okay, we need them both to do now well, not just one. Sometimes you test well here and this is terrible. So then you're like, why is my plant not growing well? Sometimes you look here and it's terrible and you realize, oh shit, there's very little in the soil anyways. I needed to look at this. It wasn't gonna keep up, it wasn't gonna last. And so in here, what we have right in the middle is the mulch layer. And this is a huge difference, and this is where the rhizophagy comes in. And creating an environment that allows for flow through biology from the standard over to the saturated and keeping this loop back again. And so even though I can't draw very well, this is part of the magic that living soil growers unlocked. And so when you see a big facility and they're trying to do living soil, but they're in containers and they have no mulch layer because of the laws and the rules and mold and all the stuff they're trying to deal with, which very manageable on the home scale, they're missing on this. And so now you're gonna see like, oh man, these guys do soil tests every fucking day. And it's because they're trying to monitor what's here and add all organic inputs into here and hope that they get this trickle through the water and biology into the saturated. When you skip this area, you miss a lot of the benefit of why the YouTube series has been just banging for so long and looks so good. And people are like, man, you should show more problems. I'd have to delete this part and then I could definitely show more problems. And we've showed some problems, right? So Something to be aware of. I think a paradigm shift is knowing that just the standard soil test is everything in the soil, like rock dust. That's gonna last forever. But when you take really strong acids and dissolve them, that's what the soil test tells you. They say how much calcium, forever. How much, all of these ions, right? Cations, anions, we could talk about all the soil testing, but all of it is on the standard test. Now the saturated is only what's water soluble and it's very different. When we first started testing, what we noticed was percentage breakdown of the importance never matched. Until we got that right, we weren't as confident offering potting soil. And once we did and others caught on, I think that's what's really changed the soil industry. But I still believe we're one of the only ones that publish. I think we're the only one that publish our information. And I want to do that so you can make your own scorecard and your own batch. We're investing more money into making more precise measurements for every batch we make. Within the next year, we'll have implemented many of those. And right on the bag, it'll have the batch number so you can go reference your soil test and reference how it works. Now, the only thing that's going to change, even when we have batch testing all the way to the bag, is homemade is different than when you put it into a little bag and ship it and it goes through temperature fluctuations. It can change biology, it can liberate some nutrients and others. And so that's why there's almost never gonna be a perfect bagged soil test. And that's why when you buy BuildASoil, day one, right, is fresh soil. We do not wanna be on day one. We wanna immediately put in the concepts that we talked about with the mulch layer and create an advantage where we start to build something different than fresh soil that's totally alive. And so even with BuildASoil, if you haven't made it yourself, we encourage you to follow our new soil container setup guide that tells you how to do this. That gives you the best chance at having a really, really, really good grow without having to be so smart about all this stuff. All right, so we mentioned all of that stuff, the paradigm shift about how it flows through. There's a couple other things that we should cover on here because some people are gonna ask, some people don't even know, and so it won't really matter. But the key difference there, I wanna get into it a little bit. There's a couple of terms. And so we're gonna go into endocytosis, very briefly, okay? And the humosphere, and we're gonna talk about rhizophagy, and then why, after learning this, why the mulch layer is so important. Okay, and you can maybe see where you're missing out. So it used to be like, oh, there's some gnats, and so we were worried about the mulch layer. In fact, a lot of these Home Depot soils or whatever, you know, if they get a gnat in it, it can just be disastrous. We have a solution for it, WDG 3000, it's gone, it's a biology. So you won't really have to worry about that. But there was so many little challenges we had to overcome. However, I remember early on in the forums when I was growing, and I started to implement the mulch layer and the cover crop and the breakdown and the worms, I had some of the healthiest crops I'd ever seen in my life. And I was scratching my head because I knew there had to be more at play, meaning I felt like I was just being a steward and letting it work its way out instead of trying to be in control. And it made a huge difference. So we'll talk about that. The other things that I want to discuss really quickly are CEC, okay? Organic matter and micros. Okay, we're not gonna go deep into micronutrients. We didn't include it into our scoring system. And the main reason why is that what we found is for you to load up and keep in flow on the saturated paste test, all the chemistry to keep your micronutrients up. Even when we've recently added them, they don't show up on the soil test very well. When you have high CEC, high organic matter, you get lost in the micros. And part of the reason why is a normal farm might have from 0 to 5% organic matter. Where our potting soils always on Logan Labs basically say greater than 20% because it just maxes out their scale and they can't figure it out. Some of them are over 50% organic matter. That complexes a lot of these nutrients, and when we see companies that try and front load massive amounts of micronutrients to match the CEC on all the math, they end up creating more problems with micronutrients than they solve. That's why BuildASoil recommends that we use Big 6, right? Which is the 6 micronutrients. The only one we left out is iron, which we have copious amounts of rock dust in our material. And then when we do the mulch layer and we take advantage of endocytosis and rhizophagy, we're getting access to micronutrients from little bits of Big 6, as well as from the rock dust, compost, and all the other things that have all of the source material for life. So the ocean has the entire periodic table of elements. While it has some problems, it has some benefits. The other thing that we'll look at on these numbers, which we'll talk about soon, would be stuff that's not on the main soil test, and that's gonna be chloride, bicarb, soluble salts, which we'll discuss because there's a lot of confusion there when people see salts. They're like, what does that mean? And so we're gonna go over that. But CEC, we used to treat it as the gospel, but that's more for farm soil. And the reason why is that's the cation exchange capacity. Essentially, it's how the clay fractions of the soil have a negative or positive charge and hold onto it almost magnetically, these other charges, and then how the plants can exchange them by giving a positive for a negative, etc., to take up the nutrient. That's a chemistry kind of equation. And when we get into endocytosis, it bypasses much of that. And so it doesn't matter quite as much, especially when we have high organic matter. However, what we do is we focus on increasing the CEC in our potting soils so that we can treat it as if there are nutrients held on there because we want to keep it forever. We do that through lots of rock dust and compost that have some clay fractions. And that actually provides some CEC that works like a farm soil that holds nutrients for the long term and is of great benefit. And you're gonna see that in the soil tests because what CEC says is by balance of nutrients, you need percentages, but the CEC is how much. So what I mean by that is if you have a potting soil and you dump a whole bunch of nutrients in, those aren't actually magnetically on the soil. They could just be mixed in the bag. And as soon as you use it with water, it just leaches out, doesn't stay in the soil or burns the plant because it's not organically slow released. And so when we do it properly and we have minerals and everything in there, it actually like magnets on there and then it won't leach out and then it's slower release and it creates balance. And that's one of the things that we're looking to doing. So that's important. And I just wanted to discuss that before we get really too deep into it. The other thing is I'm talking a lot. And so sometimes I'll have an idea and I'll gloss over something that I intended to focus on. So if I do that here and you notice I miss something important that you really wanted me to talk about, please drop it in the comment. I love this stuff. I want to talk about all of it. Okay, so CEC, you're gonna see that, here's what I forgot. The CEC is like a cup. So let's say you go and you get a cup that is 8 ounces, okay? That could be considered an 8 CEC. It's how much it holds. And then of that, you could have 70% calcium. You could have 10% magnesium. You could have 5% potassium, but it's still only 8 ounces of nutrient. The CEC is more how many sites there are to hold magnet to. So it's not a cup, but it represents it very well. Versus if you have an 80 ounce cup, okay, so now it's huge. You can still have 70% calcium, 10% magnesium, 10% potassium, making up all of the nutrients in there. But the difference is when you're flowing from the standard test to the saturated test on a low CEC, it's very easy to correct any percentage that's wrong by adding a touch of nutrient. This is good for hydro. It's good for when you need to feed and make corrections and steer. Over here, this takes a lot to affect the same percentage because it's more, which means if you're overdone it on a percentage, it's a lot more. If you're under, it's a lot less. And so correcting is a little bit harder, especially if you're only thinking in chemistry form. What we do with BuildASoil is we load up something with a medium CEC, flows to saturated paste test perfectly by chemistry by looking at how we build the potting soil, which means the foundation is fucking set. Chemistry-wise, it's good. We're loaded with biology, and then when you set up the mulch layer and you follow the magic of the BuildASoil way, you start to unlock the biological flow that removes some of the requirement for chemistry to be perfect. That's where everything starts to happen. So now we're gonna look at the soil tests. We'll talk loosely about the CEC, but we're gonna go through all of the different numbers and talk about how do we make our scorecard. Once we're done with telling you how we made the scorecard to be as fair as possible, where these numbers come from, because if you go to Logan Labs, and you say, what are the saturated paste test target numbers? They are very different from what we're gonna go over because we have a much higher nutrient demand indoor with lights and all the stuff, or in a greenhouse, or in your backyard with a really fast growing plant compared to the average lettuce or something like that, okay? We also have some targets from the ideal soil. Some of these are slightly different and he doesn't go over saturated paste test. So there's lots to cover, but I really think we're gonna go over it pretty quickly. What I want to do is say, how did we come up with these numbers? And that's what we're going to go into right now. Okay, so how did we come up with our target scoring guide? And now, once you understand it, you can use these targets to see how you're doing. Some of these numbers are a little made up based on what we've seen. And so I'd love to have discussion about some of these things and see what you guys all think about it. All right, so how do we do it? Well, I've been doing this for a long time. And so I came up with all my own targets. I scored everything out, and I was kind of worried because some of them didn't score very well. And I don't want to make anyone look bad because that's not what this is about. This is an internal scoring mechanism. It's really not what all these soils were designed for. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. And you can certainly make any of these potting soils grow. All right. So if you're looking at one of these and say, hey, I own it and it works okay. I promise there is a big difference in test results and how that translates in real world. But just know that you can probably get most of these to work. But when it comes to how do we design our soil thing, one final thing I did, even though I had the entire scorecard built from all of my own internal numbers from all the soil testing we've done, I thought, okay, let's be non-biased as possible. Let's go to ChatGPT, which for those of you that use it, it can be a little bit biased towards the person that's asking. And so I asked it as non-biasedly as possible. And so what I told it was that I want you to do deep research. I engaged deep research mode. You can do the same for yourself. And I said, I use Logan Labs, standard soil test, and saturated paste test. I'm looking for ideal targets for the saturated paste test for a living organic soil because Logan Labs numbers themselves are very different from what the living soil community has come up with as target numbers. Can you give me target numbers for the following? And I went through the entire test and I said, I want target numbers for soluble salts, chloride, bicarbonate, sulfur, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. And then I want them by target percentage because sometimes you have the right target level and you realize by percentage it's way off. And the percentage matters a lot because that's the balance and that's super important. It'd be like saying, hey, there's not much salt in that. And you go to taste it and maybe the bite was small. So by grams, there's not a lot. But if it was pure salt, it's gonna taste very salty. And so that's why percentage, 100% salt is different than 1% salt. Both could be a milligram of salt though. One might be a milligram on something very sweet, tastes very different than when it's pure salt. So percentage is very important. We're gonna go over that. What it did is generate tons of references to lots of people within our community. So reference Grow Room 420, Soil Doctor, Earthworks Turf, Soil Doctor, BuildASoil. So my BuildASoil was more like on chloride, which I looked at to make sure it wasn't self-referencing. We don't really have this internal scorecard public, so it's nothing that was referenceable. And the numbers that we got on here are almost identical to what I created my scorecard in. The only number that was slightly different was potassium, and I'll explain why. I mentioned in the beginning, we look for a higher bricks style, which you can look into what bricks is, and I don't really do bricks testing because I think it's kind of the tail wagging the dog. Other people really believe in it. But one of the core tenets I realized, and I found this true in all the books, was that high calcium was core of healthy plants. And you'll see the number one number on here has to be calcium, where everything else gets out of whack. So when there's soil with low calcium numbers, it really fucks up the score. However, it's very cheap and easy to add. So it's not the end of the world. Some things in excess are harder to deal with than low. Low calcium, add some calcium, right? So take these scores with a grain of salt, okay? But high calcium was imperative. What we notice, and there's many people that walk through me teaching me this over the years, people that I've worked with, books, and so we certainly didn't create any of this on our own. In fact, I think I took the book out because I was referencing it, but there's a Steve Solomon book on soil testing, and we've got a number of other ones that go over the actual breakdown on all these target numbers, but they weren't doing it for potting soil, and so that's where there's a lot of misinformation and differences. However, we noticed that if we use cheap compost or local compost, we were getting potassium, and it was too high, and sodium, even though it wasn't that high, it was too high when added together on the saturated paste test. If it was greater than say 25%, it could be a real problem in performance, even though the soil test looked good. And so what our focus was on making our potting soils is lower than you would think on K, and make sure we're really low on Na, sodium. And so the reason why is we recommend the mulch layer. Okay, the mulch layer is going to have the straw, which breaks down with the cover crop. But more importantly, we put craft blend or an all-purpose amendment and lots of compost. Compost has lots of potassium in it. Although our soil is built balanced with the other minerals, there is potassium in it. We leave some of it out so that when you set up the mulch layer with straw, craft blend, compost, the things that we teach in our new container setup guide, And if you water in with things like a little bit of the yucca, Thermex 70, it's got some potassium in it, molasses, the Kuyaha, and you set up that mulch layer, you're going to raise this K up a little bit. And we wanted a living soil to start with a little bit lower. That way, when you go into flower, anything that you're doing is not gonna overdo it. And that keeps the calcium as the highest. And so that's just what makes really, really healthy plants. The reason why this is important, we stopped seeing powdery mildew, disease, insects were not as big of a problem. I'm not gonna say, a lot of high bricks growers say they'll have 0 pests. I believe that's complete bullshit, but it does make a significant difference. It's like saying all healthy humans will never have disease. It's like, no, but I know tons of people that never go to the doctor, eat well, exercise, they don't have problems. And so they have a better quality lifespan. And so maybe they lived to the same age, but the person that adopted some of these principles had less pain, was happier, had better emotions. As we're learning, the biology and the brain are very connected. And so it's very, very important to me. Okay, so that's how we designed a lot of our soils, and you'll see that. So when I came up with this, it targeted slightly higher numbers than I was targeting. So to be fair, I went through and rescored everything, included the updated potassium numbers, and I basically, you can go through and ask all these questions of the internet, do your own research. I think we have an amazing standard for how this scoring was done. Now, the only thing, when I release this to you, you have to kind of read between the lines where there's only so much space. And so I might say greater than 600 or less than X, but I didn't put like plus or minus this or that. And I didn't go like, for instance, if we're looking for a scale from 0 to 200, I didn't say from 0 to 100 and 101 to 200. I just said 0 to 100, 100 to 200. And if you're at 101, go in the next group up. And so this isn't perfectly designed, but it's perfectly easy to use, and it creates a scorecard nonetheless. And so how does it work? Okay, I'm gonna explain it. It's kind of hard to see on camera here. But essentially what I did is the numbers from left to right are 1 through 10. And so I'll do a little bit of a demo. I'm not gonna put all the numbers here, but I want you to understand. Now, this will be available, so you could probably just download it and reference along with what I'm about to go over with you. But on here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 out of 10 is what we're shooting for. It's almost impossible. And so when you get your soil test, you're gonna have a certain number, like what's the pH? Okay, this one's super easy because you can tell it's not math related. So on our score, okay, a 1 is less than 5 pH is a 1, or greater than 8. I'm not gonna be able to fit all these in here, but that's how I would score a 1. And so when you get your soil test back from Logan Labs, you'll say, I am 4.9 pH. You would get a 1. Or you could be like our farm, which I have the original soil test. It was 8.1 pH from our vegetable farm next door. Okay, I would score a 1 because I was over 8. So either way, that was terrible. Now, we produce some amazing vegetables in that alkaline soil. And the main reason is the calcium is absolutely jacked in it. And we did a pretty good job managing the rest. And so you can absolutely make it work. A 1 doesn't mean it won't work. It just means that according to our internal standards, if I'm making a potting soil for flowering, I'm trying to get out of the complexity of all the organic inputs, then cooked for weeks. Then it comes alive, and then we take it and we put it in a bag and we send it to Logan Labs, and they rush and they test it for us. And if we can hit 6.3 to 6.6, I feel like I'm doing a good job as a fucking chemist in the back making these recipes over the last decade so that we can target that. Now, have we come in lower or higher? Absolutely. That's part of why we're teaching this, is that we're getting better every day. We're targeting these as our parameters, and I want you to know. Now, one thing that can happen with pH in organic is when you put it inside a bag, okay, and it has fresh stuff that's not completely broken down biology. If the bag is completely sealed, there's no air holes in it at all, it can get anaerobic, it can drop the pH, and it can raise the nitrogen up. And we've had that happen before. So that's one problem. Similar to like making ferments. A lot of people made ferments. They're like, this is great. And then they would send it to their buddy and it would explode in the mail. And so sometimes the packaging and stuff can change things a little bit. That's why we tested bagged potting soil of our own instead of from our bulk area. But all of our bulk testing is done from the 2-yard sack where it's cooked. Then we bag it. And so there's always going to be a little bit of a translation on your batch, depending on the weather, the time of the year. Now, all the things we've learned from this, we have the perfect size perforation, the UV blocking, and the right moisture so as to not have that happen. But that's all from learning through using these testing instead of, just trying to say our shit didn't stink. We've had many problems over the years, thankfully very isolated, but that's how we learn. That's how we got better, is we're constantly learning, okay? So now that you know that the scoring is created, I have a different number that gets you 1 through 10 on all of these. And you know that I use GPT to offset all of my work to say, are any of these fair? Okay. And so on here, you can see that the soluble salts, the chloride, all that, you can do your own research, but our scorecard, okay? I don't want to write them all down. I want you to go get it because there's too many here. But essentially, we like a little more sulfur, and the sulfur creates terpenes, and that creates a lot of the aroma that we're after. So many of these soils that weren't designed to be a living soil, they're going to be lower in sulfur. And for a while, I'd be reading the books and they said there's no excessive level of sulfur. But we found there's definitely a minimum when it comes to making a quality living soil. I think there definitely is probably an excess, and so we've done that on here. Our target range on the soil test was 500 to 1,000. And then when we go down to the saturated paste test and we look at sulfur, it's different. It's greater than 50, but less than 200 parts per million. And the reason why is when we're looking at 500 to 1,000 parts per million or pounds per acre, that has to flow from the permanent soil test over through the biology and the water and everything into what's water soluble and available. But what I forgot to completely cover, and I think before I go to these notes, I need to at least just briefly touch, is in that mulch layer, the magic of what we're talking about, okay, is the endocytosis and the rhizophagy. Now, the reason why this is huge is this allows plants to eat stuff that is non-soluble. So even though we put a lot of work in our living soil to make sure that we score well on both types of tests, this is all the standard test, this is all the saturated paste test. The way you win is when both are good, and that's very fucking hard to do, but we've done it. And so that's day one though. Once you set up the mulch layer, according to the BuildASoil new container setup guide, and you see the plant health for yourself, and you see this stuff happening, and you see the worms and the mushrooms and the decay and the breakdown, you're going to know for sure that something here is happening. And so in the Humisphere book, what he explains is that even drawing in the roots, and this is correlating into the newest research, that at the root tip, right, this sloughing off point where the root tip is penetrating through the soil, there's lots of biology around here, and they're interacting with the minerals and the non-organic nutrients. And we thought they would have to like excrement them into a soluble form, and then the root hairs and everything would absorb these nutrients through ion exchange. But what the book is saying, okay, look up Humisphere, it's fucking fascinating. Okay, you can look up my speech at the Living Soil Forum. But in any case, they're creating pockets where they're actually pulling living organisms in here, not water-soluble nutrients. Then they're breaking down the living organism or slaving them to go get nutrients and spinning them in and out of the root system. And so when we hack the system by getting both the soil test right and the saturated paste test right, and you could probably just crush it, what you would need to do to win, big container. Because now it's not gonna run out in flow. As long as you keep it wet and some biology going, it's probably gonna work. But when you get slightly smaller, you really have to have this mulch layer, and it works best in a big container with the mulch layer. You have the widest opportunity for success, because now you have decay and death. In the mulch layer, where you don't have just a little amendment mixed in the soil, you have straw, cover crop, worms, the craft blend, the compost, all breaking down, arthropods, little critters moving around. You create an entire ecosystem where this fucking activates. And you have endocytosis, which eventually became an explanation for what rhizophagy is, because endocytosis was never talked about in plants. It was not agreed upon. When all the chemical companies shifted and they said water-soluble ions is the school of thought, we went away from all of the possible research that could have been done on this, and it's just now coming back around. Endocytosis in animal communities and all that has always been long recognized, but not in plants. The rhizophagy is the endocytosis specific for plant roots, and it talks about how they can eat larger fucking molecules than we talk about. It can work with biology, take them in and push them back out through a complicated process that seems pretty simple when you read about it. That is the paradigm shift. Standard soil test, saturated paste test. How do you keep the bulk with enough by percentage to flow in balance into the soil? If you've only got chemistry, it's a lot harder. Might as well just go hydro. But if you set up that mulch layer, you work with all the principles of the BuildASoil way, you will have incredible success. And this is very easy to do on your home garden as well, but it's harder to do at scale. At scale, you have mulch and worms and all that, and you come with your machine to harvest lettuce that's gonna get straw in the lettuce. So many things have to change for large scale production, and I think that's why a lot of that went out the wayside. That is the most important thing I want to discuss today before we get to the soil testing. So now I've done it, now we can go over the scores. Now you know that, hey, these scores, while some of them are bad, it's not a representation of that company in the sense that they didn't set out maybe to build a living soil in the same parameters that we did. And it's clear because if they use ingredients that living soil doesn't even agree with, then they're just got their own version going on. It's not what the BuildASoil way is about, and that's totally fine. Okay. This is big. We're gonna go over the report cards. I'm just gonna go quickly through them all, and then I'll go through some of the high and low numbers and how it got to that. And then maybe I'll wrap it up with a little bit of discussion. But again, please, 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 please. I'm not trying to bash any of these companies. I'm not trying to say we're perfect by any means. We don't have a perfect score. We're in constant pursuit of the perfect score, and I don't think it exists, so keep that in mind, all right? All right, so I've got our 3.0 recipe report card. I'm gonna put that over here. Fox Farm, Route 707. Oh my God, I didn't go through ingredients. All right, we're gonna go through the report cards. Stay and hang out with me after, even after the report cards. And we'll see, do the ingredients even line up, okay? I have to do that. I talked a big game on ingredients, and I wanna make sure we read the bags and look at the ingredients. Fox Farm, Route 707, we have Coast of Maine Stonington Blend, Bio 365 flour, we have Black Gold, we have Ocean Forest and Happy Frog, which pretty cool. It's gonna be fun to talk about. Guy Green, Near Source Organic, BuildASoil Light, okay, Miracle Grow Organic and Kellogg Organics. And so I'm just gonna start at the top. I've got Fox Farm Ocean Forest report card. You can see that I've got the top right here. It's hard to see, you can download these though. We've got CEC, pH, organic matter. Then we have sulfur, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. Then we have by percentage breakdown, a score for calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. And then we have a last little score on ammonium and nitrate, because it could be one area that could affect in the bag as the nitrogen is very flux. And that might be important, especially on the woodier ones, you're not gonna see any, and then some of these, you're gonna see a lot, okay? Then saturated paste test targets are below, and I've already gone over what those targets were. So let's go through one at a time. Fox Farm Ocean Forest report card. Out of a possible 260 points, Fox Farm Ocean Forest got 161 points, 61.92%. By report card, that's a D-. Of course, this soil is workable. And so where are its weaknesses? Weaknesses according to our internal parameters, right? This will produce something. I've used Fox Farm Ocean Forest. So let's look at it, okay? Real quickly, I can't go through all of these. Download it, look on your own. CEC, okay? I forgot to put it on this one, but it's not that imperative. Let me see if I have them all in here. Yeah, so on some of them I put them on. I will update this for the public because obviously we have all the soil tests. I'll put the CEC on there. Now we didn't score the CEC, which is why it didn't really matter for this, because CEC, depending on what you're using it for, could be different, and it's not exact. So we didn't score anything for CEC, all right? But pH is where we did start scoring. The other one we did is organic matter. If you got greater than 20%, you were at a 10, because I wasn't sure if I'd get a bag potting soil that came in at like 5%. But because mostly the organic matter is lighter weight compared to like minerals, every single potting soil was greater than 20% organic matter on the test. So they're all potting soils. They all scored the same. They got a 10 out of 10. Fox Farm, pH, ideal was 6.5. That depends on who you ask, right? Fox Farm came in at 6.7. So they scored an 8 out of 10, okay? And this is why I shared it, is a lot of people will look at that and go, all right, it's great soil. Then they'll go to sulfur. And so we want 500 to 1,000. This came, it had 58. Now that's pretty common in a lot of soils because they're not focused on the terpene creation and the sulfur and having it higher based on jacking the calcium and some of the other things. We used to also think that sulfur would like harm the microbes, but it's incredible what kind of biology you see in our potting soils. So sulfur, 500 to 1,000. 58 was the number, so it scored 1. Phosphorus, we want 200 to 1,200. Big range, it's more about what your intention is for. You can flower in something that has a little bit less as long as the P to K is balanced and you set up the mulch layer right, but typically we're shooting something for a little bit higher. So that's why there's a big range there. But this one scored 235, which is really on the lowest end. And so that is a 5 out of 10, 50%. Calcium, we're shooting for greater than 5,000 here. 2,314. So it got a 2 out of 10. Now, it's pretty common with a lot of bagged potting soils. When I go down by percentage, I want to see 60 to 85% calcium on the standard soil test. Well, they're at 68%. So what we're seeing here is that while we're grading the calcium at 2,314 parts per million, and we want over 5,000, if this particular soil had it over 5,000, it would skew the percentages a lot because it doesn't quite hold as much nutrient, probably due to a lower CEC, where we're targeting a slightly higher CEC. So that's why I gave a grade on the numbers, but I also gave a grade on the percent. And there's sometimes you're gonna see a great grade on the number, but a very low grade on the percent. That's the only way we can comparatively accurately do this, is give a score for both, because really it's about both. It's all relative. You might score perfect on potassium and then realize potassium is way too high by percentage. And so that means your others are just low, not that potassium is really that high. It's just that when the others are low, it looks like it's a higher percentage. So that's how it all breaks down. Then we go to the ammonium and the nitrate. I'm just gonna go anything that stands out here. So the worst on here was calcium and sulfur. It just scored low on there, and you'll notice that our internal parameters is to have very high calcium and good sulfur levels for the living soil system. By percentage, it actually scored 9, 8, 9, 10, so it did very well by percentage on the soil test. What your plants care about by percentage is more about the saturated paste test. But when it's by percentage right on the soil test, that's half the battle, and so at least it might stand a chance. So when we look at the saturated paste test, we want to target soluble salts around 1,000 for a fast-growing plant. The Fox Farm only scored 232, which I found was interesting because a lot of people say it is salty. I'm sorry, it is hot. I was always told a little too hot for seedlings. You got to cut it, right? It doesn't look like that's true. Soluble salts is very low, 232. Chloride was 23, bicarbonate 37. And so chloride was actually too low, which a lot of these are going to be excessive. And so they scored 4 out of 10 because we need a minimum level of chloride, as it's actually a nutrient. But in excess, it can cause a problem. And bicarbonate was right in the pocket, just the right amount of bicarbonate. And that's probably because their calcium was adsorbed into there and it's a decent mix. But when you look at overall score, it's lacking as far as our internal parameters and these numbers. So sulfur, we want to see on the saturated paste test, okay, soluble salts, 232 instead of 1,000. That means no matter how perfect the percentages are, you're going to have to supplement. Well, that's what the soil is designed for. You buy the Fox Farm fertilizer with the soil and you supplement. So it was not designed to be a living soil, and that's why it's scoring low. For instance, the next one, besides the chloride and all that, so sulfur, we want to be above 50. This came in at 13. Phosphorus, between 1.5 and 4, came in at 0.97, so a little low, right? You're gonna have to feed. Calcium, ideally greater than 200 with flow from the standard, keeping up in the saturated paste test. This one scored 36, well below the ideal 200, which could be very lacking as far as our internal parameters. Magnesium, greater than 20 but less than 35. This scored 8.72, got a 7. So it just goes on and on down the list. And here's what I want to get at. On this one, 68% calcium on the standard test. But because the availability was low, it only scored a 49.87 on the saturated. So 50%. We want it to be similar, 60 to 85%. You can see on the scorecard. That put magnesium towards the top end, put potassium at excess, and put sodium at excess. And so that overall scored very low because right when you plant into it, potassium and sodium in excess, calcium low. Even though overall it's a low amount, that's why it's going to be perceived as hot. And so one of the things we notice right away, when you get the greater than 25%, let's say, on the soluble for the K plus the Na, the salt, and it's like that, that can cause what appears to be a hot soil. So this one, when you combine the K plus the Na, was 30.06. That's greater than the 25%, or that's greater than 25 by percent when you add them. And so that scored a 2, and that's part of why this scored so low on our internal parameters. 161 out of 260 is a 61.92%. Now, one of the things I thought was kind of cool is, I'll go over Happy Frog next. Now, of course, I don't agree with a lot of the ingredients in these soils, and that's another internal thing we'll have to talk about. So you might be looking at these numbers going, that's not bad. But you also have to make sure gut check you're okay with the unethical treatment of animals from some of the resources these come from. So let's see, where's the Happy Frog? Grab the Happy Frog, let's go through that. So the Happy Frog got a D, slightly better than the Fox Farm. It got a 62.69 versus a 61.92. In fact, after I readjusted for potassium, this went from a 10 to a 6. So this one dropped down by 4 points, which puts it at, man, just a little bit worse actually than the Ocean Forest. So the Ocean Forest did test better than the Happy Frog. And so you can look over those numbers, but what I thought was kind of cool is when you did Ocean Forest and Happy Frog 50-50, which a lot of us did back in the day and were recommended by our buddies, it scored a C, which is one of the higher scoring ones that we had according to living soil parameters that BuildASoil runs, right? This isn't like their parameters. And so 103 out of 130 on the soil test and 87 out of 130 on the saturated. The saturated here got to 62% calcium, 24% magnesium, a little high, 8.59 potassium and 5.19 sodium, which put our total potassium and sodium at 13.78, where before we were over 25. And so honestly, I think that because Happy Frog's a little woody, I didn't go over ammonium and nitrogen, but there was nothing crazy. Let's look at the Fox Farm had, yeah, very little, 23.6 parts per million. So like not a ton of nitrogen, nothing spicy at all. When you combine them together, everything looked better. It's kind of wild. And so there's some still weaknesses, right? Like we care about the terps. The sulfur didn't score high on our internal system. Phosphorus didn't score very high. Calcium scored very low, and that could potentially open up for powdery mildew disease. You're gonna have weaker cell walls when the calcium's low, and so many reasons why we focused on building a true living soil versus a lot of these are marketed to be purchased. Like you buy CalMag when you run these, which makes sense how they designed it. But people are comparing these soils and saying, oh, look, this is a little bit cheaper. Well, ours is twice as heavy, which is of bigger value, and you keep it forever and you don't throw it away. And it already has a lot of the work front loaded. So you don't have to buy all these supplemental systems. And then when you don't look at buying craftblend as fertilizing, you look at it as establishing a mulch layer that activates rhizophagy. It's very, 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 very different than thinking you have to feed your new soil. You're creating a loop of life that continually goes from the standard soil test to the saturated paste test and keeps it in movement. Nature, energy likes to be in motion. It is not stagnant. So that's why I think this is so exciting. All right, so Roots 707 got 160 out of 260, got a D minus. We got Coast of Maine Stonington blend. This one got 157 out of 260 or 60.38%. Bio 365, let's see, 149 out of 260, 57.31%. Black Gold got 161 out of 260 or 61.92%. Gaia Green got 143 out of 260 or 55%. Near Source Organic. In fact, Gaia Green we got to talk about because I didn't talk about AA8.2. That's the one that we have to discuss. Near Source Organic, 117 out of 260. Oh my gosh, 45%. According to our internal standards, this would be hard to adjust versus what they may be using this for, just raised bed, like filling up organic matter. I'll have to look at the bag. But from the pH to the soluble salts to the to chlorides, like there's a lot of things that might present a bigger challenge if you were focused on winning our internal scoring system. Miracle Grow Organic, 38.85%, so 101 out of 260 possible. And people use this to grow annual flowering plants and they'd be wondering why it's lacking when maybe it wasn't designed for it. And it certainly wasn't a living soil, ingredient-based, intentional, mixed according to soil and saturated with flow, thinking about the mulch layer, okay? Kellogg Organics, just because it says organics, right? A little better, 163 out of 260. And then last, which, I scored these all the same and I was a little bit holding my breath thinking, what if we scored like a C or a B on our own internal testing? One of them was a B. So BuildASoil Light, this testing parameters for flowering plants. BuildASoil Light is built to be amended to flower if you want, but it's not designed for flower right out of the box. It's more like an all-around, all-purpose soil. And so this one got a B+. It got 228 out of 260 with a slight weakness on phosphorus and a few other areas that we can discuss one by one if you'd like. And then the BuildASoil 3.0 got an A- or 238 out of 260. And this is just one that we pulled from the bag. I ran another one from a recent test was a B+, another one that was a higher A. And so we're consistently hitting metrics within this report card. And even though we're not perfect and we've not had a perfect score, this is helping us be of better service to our customers, making sure that we can guarantee this stuff to work the way that it's intended. And so I think that's super exciting. When you look at these, I think it'll be pretty clear what our scorecards are, why the numbers are the way they are, and we could literally go one by one through each one of these and go up and down on why it's important. Right away, weaknesses that the 3.0 recipe had as far as the internal scoring. When you look at saturated paste test, we got a 9 on soluble salts, 1134, which I think is really fucking good. It's probably a 10, but you know, we built the scorecard. We got to stick to it. Chloride, we got a 9. A 10. Bicarbonate, a 10 out of 10. A sulfur, 10 out of 10. Phosphorus, 8 out of 10. So we tend to rely on the microbes more. And so you'll notice that BuildASoil is not excessive on the phosphorus. And some of these that were built, like when we look at some of the other brands, they have excessive levels of phosphorus. And so let me see if I can find just by numbers, not brand. Let me go look and see what we're working with here. Just to pick something comparatively higher. So let me see where a high number is gonna be. All right, so Miracle-Gro Organic, 2,245 parts per million, and our range is 200 to 1,200 on phosphorus. This is excessive. This is like what I used to see when we'd see super soil. The hot portion of it mixed with lots of phosphorus amendments. And then you go down to the soluble test, and it's at 10.91 when we want to be between 1.5 and 4, which is excessive amounts of phosphorus water soluble. So it must be some monoammonium phosphate or some crazy fast release stuff. I don't know. This is, again, according to our own internal scoring system, it scored a 1. And so too much can also score low, man, and it can really be a problem. Let's see where other ones were. Here's another really high one. So phosphorus is 2,097 ppm on this one for Bio 365 flower. And so then their potassium was 1374. And so right off the gate, I like to see higher phosphorus than potassium. So if at least it's jacked in percentage, and they probably even talk about that. But man, that's a 5 out of 10 on phosphorus for us and a 3 out of 10 on potassium. And then when you look at the numbers by how they stack in percentage, the potassium scored a 3 out of 10. Then when I go down to availability, you look at phosphorus and it scored an 8.47, which is way greater than 4, which dropped it to a 1 out of 10 on our phosphorus level. It's just too much according to our internal mechanism. And so some people might find success with that. It could be a random sample, but this is why we do testing. This is why I invest tens of thousands of dollars to make sure that what we're doing is worth it. So I don't want to go into individual brands. We're just talking about the scores. If you have questions about this, drop them in here. I'm going to make available all these report cards so you can go line by line through every single number. I'm going to make available a scorecard so you can use this on your own to score your own soils as you test them and learn what you might need to adjust without having to read all these books. You can read the books, you can learn about all of it, and then you can come argue with me and say, I don't believe this, or I don't agree with this. And I would love it because it would get us all better at what we do. And I'm certainly not the expert. I've just been doing this for the last 12 years. We've learned a lot, and I want to share everything that I've learned in hopes that many of you take it further and it comes back to us. And that law of reciprocity has worked very, very well for BuildASoil over the years. That, and when you do research and we're basing everything on education, it's not us just talking shit, it's us sharing information, and that comes back. So I want to wrap this up with ingredient discussion. We talked about my big list. I've got the notes that I want to keep right here. That's why it's upside down with my pen. Guy Green, AA 8.2. I want to talk about that really quick before we get into instructions. So we'll put another section, Guy Green, AA 8.2. When this came back, it came back with a CEC of over 100. If you know about soil testing, you know that that had to be like a bag of clay, and it's not possible. And so we actually had to send it in for a retest. This information is based on Steve Solomon and others, but what they say in their book, and Steve says in his book, is if you've freshly limed your soil on your 1 acre, let's say, and you go ahead and put lime out there, oyster shell flour, dolomite lime, agricultural lime, whatever, some calcium product. The calcium comes with it, usually bicarbonate and other things that neutralizes the acid, and that's how it raises the pH. And then calcium is the nutrient that's left, and usually that's good because you want high calcium. Okay, but when you do that, he says you are gonna get a false reading on your cation exchange because the soil lab at Logan Labs, they're gonna think all this calcium that's just floating in the soil, that's not connected to the soil, that's just excessive. They're gonna think that's cation exchange when really it's just free calcium. And so what we do is we have them use an AA 8.2, which is a test for 8.2 pH, because what this does is they use a different acid that's gentler, and it extracts the calcium in a different way and allows them to truly calculate the cation exchange. Now, If we did an AAA.2 on all these tests, let's say the CEC on average was 15. When we do an 8.2 test, normally I'll see this drop to like a 12. That's with most healthy soils. When I see a really strange acreage soil that has different numbers, we'll for sure out here run an 8.2, but I'll read the calcium off the AAA.2 and all the other numbers from the regular test. So because the 8.2 uses a different acid, now I can take the calcium number as the truth. Then I can refactor my cation exchange capacity and I can determine it. So here's what we found. On the Guy Green, when we were done and we had them run the AAA.2, the cation exchange capacity when refactored for the true calcium number came back at 13.6, not at 100. That makes perfect sense. It probably, if it wasn't the calcium added like that, it probably would have come in just a little higher, but not at 100. And so we had to run that test. That really shows how skewed things were. Calcium came in at 1,178. We're shooting for over 5,000. That skewed the calcium percentage from 60 to 85% where we like to be to 21% on the soil test, which was way off. When you look at the saturated paste test, it actually gets a lot better at 57% calcium. And so there's probably some left to read between the lines there. And what I mean is, on the soil test, we determined a lot of that calcium is not actually adsorbed and being magnetically held in that soil because it probably doesn't have as much rock dust and all the stuff that allows it to do so, but it's free floating. And it makes sense because when we tested it with just water, it picked up that free floating calcium and it gave a higher score. My suspicion is that would fall off because there's nothing to pull from the pool from the standard soil test to keep it in flow to the saturated paste test. Pretty easy fix, not a big deal. However, dramatically different test result numbers. That's what I wanted to mention, the AAA.2. Do some research. If you've freshly limed, which all potting soils are, it's recommended to do that, but it can add cost. And so what I do now is I know the calcium is slightly lower, but I compare them all the same unless we see a massive CEC that does not make sense against all the other numbers, and then we rerun it. That's what we found. And so I just wanted to share that with you. All right, ingredients. Let's go through it. Okay, I'm just gonna grab the potting soils one at a time and let's do it. One that I did a printout online, because before I ordered the Guy Green Living Soil, I was looking for ingredients online. Somebody was asking me about them, and I realized the bag was different than online, so I wanted to read both. Let's see if that's still true. And then the other thing that I noticed was that I thought Guy Green was its own company, and it looks like they've been bought out by Hydrofarm. And so one of the things we're after with BuildASoil is supporting those smaller businesses. And a lot of times we've seen within our industry, big companies like Monsanto, through Hawthorne Gardening, through some of these subsidiaries, companies that sell all the toxins and poisons, working their way into our industry, buying companies up left and right, ruining them, so to speak. And I think they had ideas for tons of profit. A lot of them shit the bed, lost lots of money, so thankfully many of them have left. However, I'm always a little bit suspicious when I see some of the bigger companies. Hydrofarm, it's not owned by any of those, so it's not like Monsanto owned or something, but it is a big public company. They got stock, they got lots of shareholders, and I don't know much about any of them. I don't know how that works, but the buck stops here. I'm the only owner. My wife and I own the company. There's no partners. We make decisions on the quality of the ingredients, on the soil testing and how that passes through. And so I got a little worried when I see a big company name on there, just because I know what size can do for specifics all the way down the food chain. So let's grab that one. Let's look at ingredients. And so the other reason why, this is a little personal, even though it shouldn't be, is they use the word living soil. And a lot of people, like I said, they took our term, meaning BuildASoil didn't invent living soil, but we were cut from within that community and want to perpetuate that method as the BuildASoil way. We follow all the core tenets of it. We teach this method properly and we move it forward. To me, it's like teaching jujitsu. I was taught by someone, I teach the fundamental core principles, and I want you to dominate because we know this works at the highest level. When you start changing the principles, it's not the same anymore. It just isn't. And so to put living soil on the fucking bag, you better be walking the walk, not just talking the talk. That's like wearing your shit out in public and saying, I'm a black belt, bring it. Like living soil for real? And so let's see what it says. Guy Green. On the bottom it says, what is it? Hydrofarm? Yep, Hydrofarm. So that's how I know, right? So ingredients, peat moss, composted forest products. Remember how I said the forest products were the cheapest ones as far as filler you'll see in these bigger companies? I bet you it wasn't that way when before it was bought out. I could be wrong, but I'm just telling you, like you have to make profit for a company to keep going, pay all the shareholders. And it's been a struggle for us to figure out that formula over the last 12 years. It's hard. And just when you think you got a good thing going, if you're a little bit bigger company, you run out of ingredient. So you need to learn how to test every ingredient, find redundancies so you don't run out of quality. And I know how hard it is, and that's what has me being skeptical a lot of times. So you have composted forest products. Now by BuildASoil standards, we would never use that, okay? I don't believe that's living soil. That's, you know, they have their own standards, okay? Let's see, what's the next one? Perlite. What the fuck, are you kidding me? Perlite is not living soil. It's not living soil. Like, according to our BuildASoil definition, they might have their own fucking definition, but how we designed and created it, all of us as a community, BuildASoil didn't create it, we're perpetuating it. It means pumice, it means don't throw it away, it means forever. Okay, so whatever. We use some perlite, but like potting soil and stuff, like fucking for little seedlings and stuff. Okay. Perlite, so cocoa fiber. We talked about that. It's imported from coconut growing communities that have, look into it, okay? Coconut is, although I like coconuts and we sell coconut water powder that we're very specific with, it is a big crop, okay? So look into it. Earthworm castings, that's great. I like to see worm castings. For you to know about the quality differences in worm castings, go watch our YouTube video on comparing worm castings and compost. We bought a lot of them on the market. I think all worm castings. We compared them to Colorado Worm Company, which is like a homemade style, kind of like BuildASoil really preaches. Check out the difference. It's like 10 bags compared to one. I mean, it's just night and day. And so who knows what the worm castings are? Maybe they're amazing. Glacial rock dust. I like seeing that. Okay, so rock dust is a living soil component. That's good. Now, here's the problem. We all moved away from glacial. Even fucking Gaia Green back in the day sold tons of, I bought rock dust from Canada, from probably Gaia Green from concentrates. After remineralize.org, they would say glacial, and that's like anything that was drugged by a glacier, and it's a mixture of different rock compounds. It's not really a set standard. Coot told me basically that they would take like the snowplow fucking mineral waste and slop it up into a pile, and they'd have like this organic matter and sand and all this stuff, and they'd sell it as like a composted floor product. But in any case, through a lot of his education, I realized that people were switching from glacial rock dust, even through Gaia Green, as basalt. Basalt became not glacial, right? But volcanic basalt became the creme de la creme, the best to have as far as rock dust. You can read the book Bread from Stones. East Coast might be granite. Rock dust is good. But we go out of our way to get high paramagnetic energy rock dust like Good Vibes, which is a BuildASoil floured basalt. So, and we use that in our soil. Dolomite lime and limestone as pH adjusters, which we know do more than that. And that's probably why with both those combined, we saw that big discrepancy and had to do the AA.2 test to determine the calcium level. Fish bone meal, that's great. Alfalfa meal, good. Insect frass, good, depending on source, right? Volcanic rock dust, I don't know what that means. They sell basalt, but they didn't mention it. A lot of times they're not specific, so they can interchange. Maybe it's basalt, that'd be good. Leonardite, leonardite is like humic acid. Could be really cheap source of it though. They don't really mention that it's humic acid. Seaweed meal, usually it's kelp meal, not seaweed meal. Seaweed, if you look up the laws, Coot taught me about this, but seaweed, you could not call the seaweed products kelp. And there was a lot of specific verbiage use on what that meant because of the seaweed extracts versus the kelp being harvested from clean waters by specific companies, and some dirty kelp out there exists with lots of arsenic. Some of it's acceptable, but we pulled away from kelp because of commercial growing, because of arsenic. However, I believe for the home grower, kelp is good. Seaweed meal, I don't know, okay? Could be problematic, not sure unless I saw the raw ingredient. Oyster shell flour, another liming agent, that's calcium carbonate. So no wonder why we had to use the AA.2. And green sand, which is leftover like guano. It used to be, there was one mine that had a high potassium green sand that was phenomenal. It closed down. People still talk about green sand, and a lot of these companies, not saying this company, but a lot of them will put like guano, green sand, key words that they want us to hear. And so then I go to the website and I look up the ingredients on the website, and it says glacial rock dust. It doesn't even start with peat moss or anything. It's kind of crazy. Oh, and then soil amending ingredients. So peat moss, perlite, coconut coir, fir bark, composted porcine litter, African nightcrawler worm castings. So it gets even more specific and weird. And here's the craziest thing. I've never seen another fucking company use composted porcine. This is pig manure. Have you seen some of these pig farms? We own pigs. Those of you know the BuildASoil story, they're very close, near and dear to the heart. My wife won't. They're amazing animals. So it's kind of wild to see that. I've never seen another potting soil. Okay, so glacial rock dust, dolomite, feather meal. I thought this was supposed to be living soil. Why is that not on here? Did it say it on there? Feather? Like, what the fuck? This is the stuff that we're talking about. So, you know, some companies use it. A lot of them do. It's not really a problem, but it's like, what do you want to see on there? Blood meal? They don't talk about that. Blood meal? So it's got all the cheapest ones we talk about. Blood meal, rock phosphate, okay? I don't know what this tests for in heavy metals. I didn't spend the money to do that. Maybe it tests fucking perfect. I don't know. But we already told you on our ingredient list for BuildASoil's internal parameters, not for these companies. This is what we do. Okay, I'm trying to keep it fair. Mineralized phosphate, rock phosphate, mined potassium sulfate. And then they do say basalt rock dust here, which is great to see. Humic acid instead of leonardite, so they're trying to copy some of the ingredients. Gypsum, did not see that. In fact, when you put that on the label, it has to be a certain percentage. It gets fucking weird, so I understand that. Kelp meal, which makes sense instead of seaweed. Oyster shell, green sand. So a lot to read between the lines here. I'm not sure which one's the more accurate one. I know sometimes you order 1 billion bags and then maybe the internet's more current. Could be the internet's way outdated. This is the new one. I don't know. But we're just going over ingredients. I would say this is by no means a living soil. This terminology is not controlled by anyone. To me, I think that's fucked up to go after our community and not offer what it's supposed to be. Whew. All right, we got lots more to do. We're just getting started. This is gonna be a long episode. It's 2 o'clock. I've got a manager's meeting starting right now. I'm gonna shut this down. I'm gonna get a little bit of water in me. We're gonna pick up where I left off. I'm gonna leave everything right here. We're gonna go through every fucking bag and ingredient. That's gonna end the episode. I'm kind of glad I didn't do it before. I might have run out of steam for doing the report cards, but this is so easy. We grab a bag, we read the ingredients. Just know you might want to research the website. You might want to call the company if it's one you really like and find out what they really use. I think just what sucks is all 50 states have their own rules and some of these companies are trying their best, but they just can't talk about the ingredients the right way. Could be that too. So I'll see you guys in a few minutes. All right, so we just finished going over the guide green, and what I want to do is I want to take notes of the ingredients. And so porcine. This is a new one for me, so I'm gonna add it to our ingredients list and look it up. So porcine manure. Let's just grab them here. Oh, here's our new BuildASoil light bag. You're gonna start seeing these in the wild. We finally are using them now. I like the light. You can see the 3.0 over there, but when we got the 3.0, it wasn't outlined in black and it was a little harder to read from far away, so we upgraded this one. You'll see no animal cruelty, ingredients matter. It's really, really important to us here. We're making some comparison guides for our store to compare generic soil, which does have animal cruelty versus ours that doesn't, so to speak. Obviously we're not perfect, but we want to educate on all these things. So let's grab the next bag of potting soil. Black gold, lots of people use this. Okay, let's see what the ingredients are. All right, so ingredients. It's regionally formulated, and it's different depending on the region. And right away it says this product is regionally formulated. Every potting soil with BuildASoil is made right here. So we have full control over what goes into it. It's derived from composted turkey litter, feather meal, and sulfate of potash. And the sulfate of potash is like the cheapest potassium. It makes sense. And so this one says it says OMRI listed for organic use. Like this is like organic potting soil, but they use stuff that's GMO, right? It's not organic as far as where it comes from. It doesn't have to be, but it's still approved for organic use. So composted turkey litter, feather meal, and sulfate of potash. So I'm gonna add, obviously, I wanna read more, but I need to add the turkey. Because I just talk about chicken. Turkey's another one. Now, Distal Farms has they're organic turkeys, and they have a good manure you can get from them. So if you know of a good organic company, a lot of times if you live local, you can get some really good shit from them. So check that out. Let's see. This product is regionally formulated. It's a blend of peat moss, processed softwood bark or processed forest products, compost, perlite, and may contain cinders and earthworm castings. In Georgia, it's a blend of 45 to 55% peat. In Texas, it's a product blend of, so it's like Oregon, Idaho, California. All of them are different depending on where you get it from. So this one might be, but it's designed right. It's not designed for full flowering. A lot of people would buy this and add their own amendments and stuff, but some people think, oh, black gold organic, I'm just gonna flower my plants in that. Might be wondering why it's not performing the same based on the design. And so right away, as far as living soil, there's no living soil ingredients in here. There's no rock dust, there's no premium compost, there's no pumice. It looks like perlite. Looks like forest materials, which we talk about forest materials, composted forest products right away. Just make it hella affordable. That's fine. We're not trying to target the cheapest mix. That's not what BuildASoil is here for. All right, so Happy Frog. This is a little bit more designed for our community before living soil became a thing though. So I suspect to see better ingredients. In fact, this one looks like it's holding a lot more moisture. Fungus gnat is flying out of here, so I'm gonna get it out of here immediately when we're done. But this one has some woody components and it's a little bit heavier. And so that can hold a little bit too much water for a lot of people. And that's, I believe, why people started mixing the Happy Frog and the Ocean Forest. And then they thought Ocean Forest is a little too hot. Well, the Happy Frog with the wood in it robs and absorbs a lot of that. So it kind of cuts it. And that's why I think our Happy Frog Ocean Forest blend scored a C, which was a decent number of points for our score, although it's not living soil. So if you're starting to be a living soil grower, you want to keep your soil forever. Why would you do it? Maybe because it's available down the street, but sometimes that can cause worse problems. You're starting off with a lower score for living soil internal testing for BuildASoil, and you're having to work against it rather than work with it. So let's see what's in here. It's amended with microbes. You'll notice BuildASoil doesn't talk about that. Like when you build a birdhouse, birds show up to it. You don't have to build the bird. When you build a good potting soil and the right nutritional components with compost, microbes are prolific. You don't have to add them. When we add Rootwise is an expensive product, we add that when we have plant roots in the soil, not in a fucking bag. That's just marketing in my opinion. So that's why we don't talk about that stuff. Ingredients are 50 to 60% aged forest products. Cheap as fuck, right? I mean, that's fine. They're a business, all that stuff. I'm sure it works. We even have soil tests to prove that it'll grow something. But when you do aged forest products and we don't use any of it, there's a reason why half of this is a waste stream product that's very cheap to get. Then they add some sphagnum peat moss, and I'll bet not that much because that's expensive, perlite, and fertilizer. Seed derived from, okay? The derived from is earthworm castings, bat guano, oyster shell, and dolomite lime. I love that. So as far as a cruelty standpoint, ingredients that are in here, worm castings and guano. Now I don't use guano, but it doesn't have multiple offenders here. It only has one that I don't like. I don't like dolomite for sure, if I'm gonna keep the soil around forever. And of course, it didn't score that well, but like nothing crazy, you know, porcine, litter, no humanure, nothing weird, okay? Forest products, you'll see kind of a lot, these big companies. Route 707, man, I made living soil out of 707 in the past, tried to anyways. Cover crop mulch layer in those big 30-gallon plastic bags. You can find a video on YouTube, maybe not YouTube, maybe it's like Vimeo or something, but I've got one of these big 30-gallon bags and I'm peeling it back and you can just see the worms wiggling through like crazy in my mulch layer. And it's when I first started, it was pretty cool. Peat moss, composted forest material, perlite, okay, not living soil, cocoa fiber, pumice, awesome to see a little pumice in here, worm castings, bat guano, soybean meal, completely killed me right there. Soybean meal, approved for organic use, does not come from it. It's pesticide sprayed. It's GMO crop. Sucks. Fishbone meal, kelp meal. Okay, online, the ingredients may be different. I don't really think so. 707's been around for fucking ever. One of my big gripes with some of these companies is they're so big now that when I talk to the hydro stores that carry our products, they're like, man, the box store down the street sells it for 50 cents more than they buy it for. I can't compete. I'm losing money. I have to bring 4 pallets of heavy soil in, put the labor in, sweep up the soil, have torn bags, deal with the inventory just because they have to keep something like that. And then the guy down the street doesn't even care. Big, huge multi-million-dollar business just cuts their throat on margin. And so if you know a mom and pop shop, BuildASoil is trying to offer the best products, and it's stuff that's heavy that Amazon cannot compete with. And we work together to get it to the store, and then we can be a local resource in that community for a better product that competes against the big brands and puts profit in the little shop owner's pocket, which I think is a way better business model. Let's look at Bio365. Okay, his whole thing is like controlled indoor growing and stuff, and I'm like, whatever. Living organic soil are a thing. They've kind of come into our industry as like a living organic soil, and they're, in my opinion, they're not a living organic soil at all. They are Bio365, and that's totally fine. This is their bio flour mix, and let's see what the ingredients are on here. Cocoa core, sphagnum peat moss. So in the beginning on the Living Soil Forum, peat moss was the only acceptable ingredient for living soil. Cocoa core was not used, okay? Small amounts are used in many people's systems, but this is the first ingredient. So cocoa core, sphagnum peat moss, and then fertilizer, which you don't see in living soil. But let's see what it's derived from. Feather meal. Feather meal, it's not living soil. Like, we don't do that shit. There's no organic feather meal. Bone meal. Same thing, there's no organic bone meal. It's approved for organic use, but we don't make living soil with feather meal and bone meal. And then what's the next worst one on my list? Pasteurized poultry litter. Another, like, why? I know that they can get a whole bunch of this exactly the same, mix it, whatever, so I get it, but it's not me. Alfalfa meal, awesome. Organic, volcanic ash. Montana grows a volcanic ash. They're kind of their mines are kind of tied up right now in legal process. I don't think we're gonna have access to it for a while, but I don't know what they mean there. You don't use dolomite in living soil. We're keeping it forever. Kelp meal, stopped using it for many reasons we talked about. Magnesium sulfate, cool. Epsom salt, right? And sulfate of potash, cool. Those are kind of chemical ones, but whatever, they're fine to use. And so that's what's in the Bio 365. There's literally nothing here that talks about living soil. The perlite, not living soil. The cocoa core, not living soil. The feather meal, the bone meal, the pasteurized poultry litter, none of that stuff's living soil. So not a living soil by any means. I forget what it tested. I don't even think it tested that well as far as BuildASoil's parameters. It might test well for what you're using it for, but this is not something that I like the ingredients on. I like Happy Frog ingredients even better than that. All right, let's see what I got now. Ooh, Coast of Maine, okay. Now, although this one didn't score that well, I told you that ours is our own internal score. It's not like what everyone else is like creating their soil for. Back in the day on the forums, Coast of Maine was like highly revered and still is, because if you're looking for good potting soil, you had to make compost on your own or you had to buy a local compost. And if you went on Craigslist, you can be way hit or miss. In fact, we're probably gonna do a breakdown on available compost on the market because there's a huge discrepancy in quality. And so when you're growing hydro, you can say, what's your pH? What's your nutrients? What's your temperature? But when you were organic, you'd say, okay, go get this much compost, but you'd never ask which compost. Coast of Maine was the East Coast version of like the creme de la creme available bag compost. And we learned about crustacean meal and chitin and all the stuff in it, and they use ocean stuff. And then on the West Coast, it was Malibu and Ole Mountain. Now there's another one, Seacoast, which we really like, and the Ole has yard waste, which means trash in it, and I don't like that. I don't like yard waste compost nearly as much because there could be stuff in there we just don't know about. However, it's still a good compost. This was always recommended as the top dog for the East Coast for good compost, so I think that's really cool. I don't think it scored that well, but obviously we're using BuildASoil's like ridiculous test to score it with. Let's look at the ingredients in here. Composted poultry manure. Fuck, I was hoping it wouldn't have that. Ingredients, 40% peat moss, cocoa core, composted manure, perlite, and fertilizer. So this is not a living soil. They're not designing it to be a living soil. This is their organic growers mix. And that's fine, right? I mean, perlite, it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's just not designed to be a living soil. So if I was gonna use this, I would be adding pumice. I would be adding some of my own compost to balance the texture to keep it forever, adding some rock dust. And then they add mycorrhizae, which I told you, I don't add mycorrhizae until there's roots growing in it. Other companies do it, but if somehow it sporulates, get activated and died because there's no roots there, you're not adding mycorrhizae. We add that when the plant's roots are in it, like cover crop or like your main crop, okay? Composted poultry manure. I hate seeing that, but it is what it is. It's commonly used. Fishbone meal, better. Lobster and crab shell, better. We've noticed some ocean inputs can come with heavy metals. We didn't test this one. It's just something to be concerned with. Kelp meal, same thing. Earthworm castings and alfalfa meal. So for the most part, better, except for the composted poultry manure. So it's not multiple negative offenders. I really do like this company. And they may even have other blends that we didn't test that have different ingredients, so check that out. However, that was one that a lot of people asked for, and so we wanted to go ahead and test what our customers are asking about. Ooh, let's look at Ocean Forest. Oh man, this one's heavy still. That's good to see in here. It's holding on to its moisture. You know, and I talk about them being like ours being heavier, but let's see. It's because this is a 1.5 cubic footer, where ours are 1 cubic foot. And so ours are like 28 to 35 pounds depending on moisture, where if you do a 1.5 or 2, it's just too heavy for the store. You can't do that. So that's why our bags are 1 cubic foot. We have real stuff that's a lot heavier, and that adds up, and it's harder to put on the shelves of the store. I love the bag. Everybody loves the bag. I mean, before even ChatGPT, look at how fucking cool the art is. Everybody can recognize it. They did a killer job with that. Okay, let's look. Plant directly into Fox Farm Ocean Forest. It's ready to use. Bat guano retains moisture from forest products. So let's see, 50 to 60% aged forest products. That's why it's a profitable mix, been around forever. We talked about how we don't use any of that because that's our rule. Sphagnum peat moss, cool. Perlite, that's fine. Nobody did living soil stuff before it became a thing, and we were one of the first companies adding pumice because it's too heavy. I get it. They'd have to change the bag, change everything, but it's not living soil. It's not the definition BuildASoil has for the living organic soil. Sandy loam and fertilizer. Sandy loam. What the fuck does that even mean? I mean, for a potting soil, right? All right, derived from, so the nutrients are fish emulsion. Oh, okay, when I talked about liquid fish before, this is another living soil form movement. We use fish hydrolysate. It's fermented. Fish emulsion is caustic chemical extracted, probably a potassium hydroxide or something like that. And it's straight chemical extraction of fish, and probably just the fish that was for sale as trash at the market versus like a managed fish population. Crab meal, fine. Shrimp meal, fine. We just call that one ingredient. It's crustacean. That's the blend of all that. Earthworm castings, bat guano. We talked about guano, okay? But this is a holdover from back in the day when guano was popular. It no longer is. Kelp meal and oyster shell, at least for living soil, okay? So another one, read the ingredients. Obviously it's not a living soil, but what's funny is even the one that said living soil is not a living soil, and that's kind of wild. All right, what else do we have? Only a few more left. Of course, we talk about BuildASoil ingredients all the time. You can go read those online. We're very, very transparent with everything I do. You can come here, see everything, see our grow, see the soil, see the ingredients. No secrets anywhere here. All right, let's see this one. I'm getting excited. This has been a big episode to wrap up and teach and just share with you what's on my heart. All right, so peat-free. Ooh, upcycled green waste. It's like advertising the shit that we don't want, right? All right, let's see ingredients. This product is formulated from one or more of the following: processed forest products. We talked about that. Manure digestate. Food processing waste. Like, what the fuck? I'm gonna have to write all these down. Manure digestate, I gotta write down for sure. I'll just go over this bag. Food processing waste. The fuck does that mean? Do you guys know what food processing waste is? And or compost. So maybe compost and fertilizer. In California and Hawaii, this product is formulated with processed forest products, compost, and fertilizer. So the other states don't allow the processed manure, the manure digestate, the food processing waste, but they put it in there. Just not those states, right? And what's funny is I bet you it's the same. They just don't list it on those states, because who's gonna know? Like, they're gonna look in there and say, you added this ingredient. This product contains 0.03% slowly available nitrogen from poultry litter. And so that's where they get their fertilizer in the organic, is poultry litter, and they really don't talk about it. So I wonder if there's more. That's just wild. Premium potting soil, they call it. Certified product from the Mulch and Soil Council. I'm gonna go to the Mulch and Soil Council, and I'm gonna look up what premium potting soil means. I doubt there's any test parameter scorecard on there. In fact, I wonder if they even own that fucking company. I have no clue. It's kind of like pet food. If you're like, what do I feed my dog? They're like, you can't feed homemade food. It's got to be APCO recommended. And you look who owns it and you're like, Purina and the big guys, I get it. They educate against. Anyways, that's it. That's everything that I wanted to cover. We talked about ingredients and how they're lacking. Oh, I got 2 more bags. Just kidding. I almost ended it soon. There could be some more gems in here, so let's look, maybe some new ones. All right, so this is near source. So this is sourced and made as near to you as we can get for fewer miles per bag. MPB, help reducing overall carbon emissions. Pretty cool, right? I mean, fucking kind of, not really. It's bagged potting soil. I'm a hypocrite too, you know? Putting that shit in the potting soil. I'd rather have the best when it comes to what's going in my body. That's very important to me. Health is wealth. Regionally formulated with organic materials. In Georgia, it's this, and New Hampshire, it's this, and yada, yada, yada. Derived from processed poultry manure, feather meal, worm castings, bat guano, and kelp meal. I don't even know why they put the kelp in, like maybe just to put it on the bag in one pinch, because it's kind of expensive. So nothing special there, same ingredients, not living soil. All right, here's a raised bed mix. A lot of people just looking for cheap filler to fill up their entire raised bed. They look for the word organic. It's regionally formulated, including one of the following products: recycled forest products, arbor fines, peat, humus, compost, perlite, core, sphagnum, sand, dolomite, limestone, gypsum, organic fertilizer. Organic fertilizer, huh? Let's look. In Georgia, it's different. In Texas, it's different. In Oregon, Idaho, it's different. Fertilizer, composted poultry manure, dehydrated poultry manure, composted chicken manure, feather meal, bat guano. It's like a laundry list of what is not living soil and what not to use as far as the BuildASoil way standards. No wonder gardening is so hard. Grab some BuildASoil, learn about soil testing, learn about what affects your health, ask questions, put your questions in this video. We just covered a lot. I went over standard tests and how all that has to be in abundance to keep flowing through to the saturated test, and how the normal end of the community stops there. It says, hey, that's it. In organics, you have this organic stuff and minerals, and then it has to flow to available, and then the plant gets it. That's with bare soil, like traditional methods that are basically hydro. When we add the mulch layer, when we add in endocytosis through rhizophagy, when we add in worms, we add in dying organisms, arthropods that are dying, breaking down that layer and the entire ecosystem, we hack an entirely new process for delivering nutrients and having a very, very healthy grow. And I think in the future, we're gonna find that the vibrational energy and the health and the effect is very, very different than something low vibe that has not hit any of the perfect metrics there. And one of the things we learned early on in hydro was you had to add some of that sulfur, some of the microbes. You had to add some of the tricks from organic to get it to taste good. But why? We don't live on the moon. You can make good living organic soil anywhere in the world. Just follow the basic principles and you're gonna have wide range of success, because even if your soil test is not perfect, even if your saturated paste test is not perfect, when we stack the mulch layer, we avoid excess, we use clean inputs, we have good genetics and good environment, you will do so well. Even in a busy life, you can have great gardening success without it being a burden to you and wondering what's going wrong. That's what we teach. We want to make it easy here at BuildASoil, and we're practicing what we preach by sharing really complicated information as reduced as possible in hopes that it sparks some of your imagination to learn more. And then some of you will do research and you'll find out how much truth we're talking, and then you will find more value in our company. As someone who draws the line and says, we will not use those ingredients, we will batch test. This stuff's important to us and it makes a difference to the end consumer. If that's you, you're gonna love working with BuildASoil. Check out our other videos. Subscribe to these videos. We're gonna do more videos like this and I want you to see them. A lot of times we're age restricted, so you won't get the notice. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ask your questions. Let's talk about all this stuff. Subscribe, like, tell your friends. Until next time, I'll see you on the next BuildASoil video.